Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. Darkness prevails here. I was putting this script together and I realized I'm super in the mood for more hunting stories. So if you've gone hunting and you've seen or encountered something messed up or unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. For now, enjoy these stories, featuring a daunting series of terrifying events in the Ozarks, a demonic spirit that steals faces, and a wampus cat that kills repeatedly. Before we start, did you know you could be listening to this show and all EerieCast shows without any ads, get access to bonus stories, and unlock horror audiobooks you've never heard before? That's right, and all you gotta do is go to Eerie.fm and become a premium member to support what we do. That's Eerie.fm, EERIE.fm. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Bigfoot Wanted to Kill Me. From Anonymous. I had a double date at a Colton Steakhouse. A friend of mine told me about this podcast, so I checked it out. Cool stuff you've got here. That same friend thinks I should send you my story as well, so here goes. I should say at the start that this is the only time I've ever encountered something unexplained. I'm really just an insurance salesman. That's what I did most of my life until my back gave out, and I got disability. But back when I did work, my whole trade was a matter of teaching people that the thing they lay awake fearing at night was not likely to come for them, and I would show them a table of figures to prove it. Donna, my wife, believes most of what gets sent to programs like this one comes from dudes who saw a bear in poor light, and wanted, for once in their lives, to be the one the night had chosen. I held that view myself, up until the spring before last. I'll go ahead and tell my story, and you make of it what you will. I'm not going to beg you to believe me or anything, but I do thank you for listening. The place is up in the Ozarks here in Arkansas. I know when I'm there because my phone gives out a few miles before the road does. Then from there you're on foot. I've hunted those grounds since my father first carried me up there when I was 11 or so. It's national forest on the map, but there's a shelf of it that nobody troubles with, since the road into the bottom of it washed away sometime in the 90s. The county, I guess, never saw fit to mend it. To reach the shelf, you leave the truck at the foot of an old logging cut and climb a ridge that takes the better part of an hour when you're loaded down with a blind and a cooler and a pack that runs close to 40 pounds. No one's gonna do that for turkey when there's easy turkey down in the river bottoms. A man can just park beside his bird, really. So the shelf here was mine, year after year, and that was perfect. I hunt with a bow. I'm aware that it can be odd to hunt turkey with a bow. The short of how I came to it is that my father shot, and I shot alongside him as a boy. But after he passed, there came a time when the idea of a gun hunting turkey sat wrong with me. It's not an anti-gun or animal rights thing, but more like hunting. If I wasn't hunting with and for my dad, then, my mind told me, I should be hunting for the love of the game. And a bow would be a happy little medium between shooting a gun and strangling a bird with my bare hands. Before I had that thought, I remember taking up a bow in the backyard, doing some target training, giving my hands something to do in the evenings. When one season I thought, maybe I should just carry this into the woods, leave my gun in the truck. So I bought a ground blind to hide the draw, and I've been doing it like this ever since. It's harder work, yeah, but I think that's a lot of the reason why I love it so much. A turkey can catch you blinking at 40 yards, they say, and a bow requires a long pull to bring it to full draw. So you sit folded up inside a little nylon box with the windows let down to slits, and you keep as still as you possibly can. When your moment comes, you have about a second to draw, while the bird has its head behind a trunk or buried in the grass. There's more tactics to this, timing, even skill. I've spent whole weekends on that shelf without sending a single arrow. That's the bargain. But when you do bag a bird, there's so much more satisfaction to it. Anyway, I know that shelf and the land there like the back of my own hand. I know how it should sound at every hour of every night. I'm not the kind of guy that would mistake a barred owl for some sort of strange creature, or to be turned around in the dark by a deer stamping and blowing at me. I've slept up there on my own more nights than I could put a number to. And in the last 2 decades, the worst I've ever encountered was a copperhead that found its way into my boot somehow. That's a different story. Beyond that, the scariest thing in the Ozarks are the spreading ticks. Nowadays, you gotta worry about alpha-gal syndrome. Thanks, Bill Gates. That spring, I drove up on a Thursday. The weekend was supposed to turn wet, and I wanted the dry days for myself, so I went up early. I had a new tent I'd been wanting to try, one of the ones that's supposed to pop up in a couple of minutes, if you know what you're doing, and I figured I'd get the kinks out before it rained. I parked at the logging cut, loaded up, and started up the ridge. It was a good climb that morning. The dogwoods were blooming. About 2/3 of the way up, there's a flat where a creek crosses the trail, and I stopped there to eat a sandwich, listening to nature for a while. Off across the next ridge, I could hear a tom gobbling on the roost. That got me fired up. I made the rest of the climb feeling about as good as I get these days. I set up camp where I always do, back in this little stand of cedars where the ground is flat and the wind can't get at you. Nobody down below can see you up there. I've got an old fire ring there from all my years using the spot, too. I put the tent up, got my bedroll laid out. I hung up a food bag off a limb a good ways from where I'd be sleeping. You've got to do that, unless you want your face munched on by a bear. Then I walked out to look around while I had light. Down the slope a ways, I found fresh scratching in the leaves where a flock had been working through, and there were droppings, the J-shaped kind that tells you there's a tom. And down at the creek, I found a couple of tracks in the mud as wide as my hand. That put me in an even better mood. I set my blind in a pocket of brush at the edge of a clearing. I was hoping they would come through there at first light, so I laid out a hen decoy and a jake. Then I walked back to camp. That evening, I cooked supper and turned in early. The thing is, you've got to be in the blind before the birds come off the roost, so that means you're walking out there in pitch dark. The first night, there was nothing. I slept fine and heard the usual. One time, I heard coyotes, off toward the river somewhere. They were yipping about something, but not too close, so whatever. There was an owl, too, near the creek. I woke up a couple of times, restless on the hard ground, my first night out, but that's pretty normal. Every time I just laid there listening. Nothing out of the ordinary, and I dropped back off. Friday morning, I killed a bird. It was about the best morning of hunting I've had in years. I was in the blind before daylight. The woods woke up around me a piece at a time. A cardinal first, then crows somewhere down the slope, and then the toms cut loose up on the roost. 3 of them at least, and close. My heart was beating fast. I was excited. I gave them a couple of soft tree yelps on my mouth call. Nothing big. Just a hen letting them know she's down here and she's interested. One of them about lost his mind over it. When they pitched down off the limb, I could hear their wings, heavy slapping turkey wings. He came into my decoys all strutted up, fan out, dragging his wingtips in the dirt, drumming at the jake. Then he hung up just shy of range and stayed there. I had to sit there and wait him out. My legs were killing me at the time. I had a cramp coming on in my left foot that I couldn't do a thing about. But he finally broke and came on in to take it up with that jake decoy. When he stopped behind the hen, I lost sight of his head, so I started to draw, and when he cleared, I put the arrow right through him. He ran about 10 yards and dropped. It was a big bird, beard pushing 11 inches, spurs as big as your thumb. I went and got him, carrying him back up to camp, and I was happy enough to whistle a tune. I cleaned the bird at camp. I'm careful about that on account of bears, even though I've never actually laid eyes on one up here. Just sign and old signs at that. The parts I wasn't keeping, the guts and all, I carried way off, down the back side of the shelf to a little gully, a few hundred yards from where I slept. My dad had always drilled it into me, you don't leave that mess near your bed. Then I washed up in the creek, bagged my meat, and hung it in the shade in the cooler bag. I ate a good lunch. I'd earned it after all, and I laid down in the sun a while. It was a fine day. That afternoon, I walked back down to the gully, figuring I'd make sure I hadn't left anything that might bring something right up to the trail to me. The guts were gone, though. Now, that's nothing strange on its own. Crows, coyotes, possums, just about anything will clean that up inside an hour. And it had been a few hours. But it wasn't tore up and dragged around, which is what a critter would have done to it. There's always a mess after, feathers worked loose and a drag mark in the leaves. But there wasn't any of that. It was just gone, like someone had bent down and picked it clean. The leaves around there were barely even disturbed. One dark smear on a flat rock, and that was it. I stood there a moment, told myself I was reading too much into it. Then I walked on back up. That evening, I sat by my little fire and ate. The light came down through the cedars, all gold and then red, and the woods went quiet right at dark, the little hush before things in the night crank up. I tried calling Donna on the off chance I had reception, but there's really never signal up there. So when that didn't work out, I sat with my coffee and watched the fire. I remember being so at peace at the time, having the thought that I should really do this more, that I'd let too much time stack up between these trips. What with my dad gone and the boys grown up, so I made myself promise to do it some more. It was starting to get cold after that, so I put the fire out and drowned it, stirring the ashes and drowned it again. I then crawled into my tent. I couldn't tell you what time it was when I woke up. I never checked. But what woke me up was a sound. The sound was a knocking, one single knock, on wood. It came from down the slope below me somewhere. It sounded like a big limb when it falls and catches another limb, except a falling limb keeps going until it hits the ground. It crashes and tumbles. It doesn't just knock and quit. This was one solid knock, followed by nothing else. I laid there. I wasn't scared just yet, just curious. I was awake and listening, telling myself it was a deer knocking a dead branch loose. Maybe some rotten snag finally let go. I had the bag pulled up to my chin, and I could feel the cold coming up off the ground through the pad. While I was laying there thinking about things, it came again. A knock, coming from a different spot, off to the left now of where the first one was. It was as if whatever had done it before had moved on over in between. And then, a good while after, long enough for me to talk myself back to going to sleep, a third one that came from up above the camp, on the high side, where there's nothing but a cedar thicket and the bald top of the ridge. Somebody would have had to climb up around the whole camp to start making sounds up there, and they had to have done it quietly, since I never heard a step, and I'm a bit of a light sleeper. I lay in that tent with my eyes open in the dark. I started to focus on my breathing, making sure it was doubly quiet, so I could hear better, and also to make sure that I couldn't be heard. But there was nothing else. I didn't hear footsteps or any more knocks after that. Just those three, spread out over what might have been maybe half an hour, each one from its own spot. It had made a sort of circle around me. I told myself it was 3 separate limbs coming down, even though that was kind of silly. But what it really sounded like was something walking the edge of my camp in the dark, rapping on a tree every so often, like a fella going down a hall knocking on doors. When the sun was starting to come up, I got up, and with the sun up, I felt like a fool. I made my coffee and got my gear, then I went and sat in my blind for the morning. That's what I drove 3 hours and climbed an hour to do. I wasn't about to let a couple of weird noises run me off. And you know what? I killed my second bird that morning. It wasn't the pretty hunt the first one was. I wasn't all the way into it, thinking a bit too much about the night before. I kept catching myself looking back over my shoulder out the rear window of the blind, instead of watching the decoys. A couple of times I about missed birds moving out front on account of it. This one came in quiet, no gobbling at all, just kind of showed up at the edge of the clearing already close, which a tom might do sometimes when he's spooky or wore out running hens, and I almost didn't get a shot. But I got it, and I made it good. And that was my second longbeard. 2 of them with a bow on public land. I ought to have been on top of the world. Instead, I felt wore out. There was something sitting in the back of my head I couldn't get to settle. And packing that second bird up to camp, I was already chewing on whether I even wanted to spend another night up there, or just pack out a day early. I cleaned the second bird, carried the guts off the other way this time, away from that gully, so I wouldn't have a reason to go back to it. I hung the meat, washed up. I was sitting there at my fire ring in the middle of the afternoon, broad daylight, sun coming down warm through the cedars, when I saw the arrow. It was one of mine. I knew it right off the bat. It was my fletching. My nocks are orange, so I can find a shaft down in the leaves easily. It was standing straight up out of the ground, at the edge of my camp, a few steps from the tent. The broadhead was driven down in the dirt, so it stood up on its own with the shaft pointing at the sky. Not a mark on it either. Now, I always count my arrows. My dad beat that into me when I was a kid. Count your arrows. I'd carried 12 up that ridge. I'd put 2 into 2 birds and pulled both of them, and they were in my pack, since you don't leave a broadhead laying out in the woods. So, not counting the 2 I had in my pack, I should have 10 in my quiver. I went and counted them again to be sure. I was taken aback. There were only 9 in my quiver, but the one in the ground made 10. I pulled it up out of the dirt and held on to it. I counted all my arrows in their separate spots over and over again to make sure I wasn't going mad. It came out the same every time. One of mine had come out of that quiver, gone into the ground a few steps from my tent, and I had not done it. The only stretch it could have happened was the hour or so I was off dumping guts and down at the creek washing up, with my bow leaned against the cooler, my back turned. That's when it hit me. Cold went all the way down through my belly. I stood there in the middle of the woods, with a chill going down my spine. Something or someone had come into my camp in broad daylight, slid one of my own arrows from my quiver, stood it up in the dirt where I'd be sure to find it, and they somehow never made a sound. I should have packed up right then and right there. A smarter man would have. A smarter man would have walked right off the mountain with 2 birds and a good scare. I stood there with that arrow in my hand, and I came up with excuses not to leave. That I had miscounted, or I had dropped one just right, that it had stood up from the ground. But not one of those holds if you sit with it, even for a moment. There's no other hunter on that shelf. I'd have seen some boot prints, his trash, something to give him away. An arrow doesn't stand itself up in the dirt with no mark on it. And I don't miscount my arrows. Never. My dad made sure of that when I was a boy. But I wanted to stay. Again, I'd driven all the way out here and climbed all that way, and I'd killed 2 good birds already. Some stubborn part of me wouldn't let a few noises and a trick with an arrow run me off my own spot. So I put the arrow back in the quiver, making 10 again, and I told myself I would decide in the morning. The rest of that afternoon, nothing happened. I sat by the fire and I owned my broadheads. I ate early since I figured I'd want to be zipped in before dark. The whole time I kept catching myself turning a little sideways on the log, so I had the tree line in the corner of my eye. I would notice I was doing it, and I'd feel like a fool, even though I was alone, and I'd force myself to face the fire again. But a few minutes after that, I'd be turned around once more. You ever watch a dog stand at the screen door, growling low at the yard, even when there's nothing to see? That was me. The woods just sat there as normal as ever, but at that point in time, I hated it. It clearly wasn't normal out there, and I clearly was not truly alone. Right at dusk, the sounds of the woods faded away. Even the bugs wound down, and I sat there in silence, knowing that something was coming. I've spent enough nights in the timber to know what that usually means, that there is something moving through that even the bugs don't like. Could be an owl coming off its roost or a bobcat. But what you do is you wait a few minutes and you see if it passes on. If it does, you'll hear the bugs crank on up. So I waited. I sat with my supper going cold in my hands, and I waited for the woods to come back to me. But they did not come back. It stayed quiet for so long. It felt like sitting there by the fire in pitch-black darkness otherwise might be a mistake. Like the fire was going to give me away. Like everything could see me, and I could see nothing. So instead of stoking the fire or lighting it back up, I let it burn out. And when it did, I sat there in the dark, letting my eyes come around, eventually. After several minutes, I was able to make out the tree line somewhat, and the pale hump of my tent, but not really much else. But that's when the knock came back. It came from the tree line right at the edge of camp, closer than the night before. I was wide awake and stone sober this time. There was no talking myself out of it, and this time I knew the exact spot it came from. I was looking darn near straight at it, too. After the knocks, there came a sound I would only call huffing. Long, quick draws of air, like a big, exasperated animal. But it was coming from much higher off the ground than a four-legged creature, or even a man for that matter. I didn't move. Another knock came, off to my right. My company had moved, and just like before, it had moved without a sound. a good 20 feet across dry cedar litter that pops if a chipmunk crosses it. And yet, it was moving through it as if it were levitating. I've hunted this region my whole life. I can hear a squirrel change his mind in a tree at 60 yards. This thing crossed open ground so close to me that I should have heard every step, should have heard its arm moving and shifting as it walked. But I didn't. It was like it was in one spot and then another, with no in-between whatsoever. I crouched low, and I got in my tent. I sat down with the bow laid across my lap. A bow is about the most useless thing in the world inside a nylon tent in pitch dark. You can't draw it in there, not enough room, and you're not going to aim it if you did, not in pitch darkness. But I had to have something at that time to make me feel safe, or at least make me feel like I had an action I could take. The knocking outside kept going. It was going around the tent, all the way around, not stopping at just 3, like the last night. There would be a knock to my left, followed by a long wait, then one up behind my head, and a longer wait, then one out past my feet. And every wait in between lasted a different amount of time. Whatever was making those noises was doing it steady and slow. I don't think I've ever met an animal with that kind of patience, sometimes staying dead quiet 10 to 15 minutes each stretch, just long enough to let me think that maybe it had left me alone. But then the knock would come again, keeping my heart and mind on edge. It had all night. This was its domain, whatever it was, and I was an uninvited guest. The worst happened in the middle of the night. There was a knock to my left, then quick, way too quick, an answer off to my right, both very close. These two had no gap in between. I lay there with that bow on my chest now, realizing I was no longer dealing with just one thing out there. There was at least 2 of them. I was outnumbered. And then one of them came up to my tent. I didn't hear it approach. I never even heard it move, but I felt the ground shift. If you've ever laid on the bare dirt while something or someone heavy walks nearby, there's a kind of vibration that comes up through the ground and to your back, and you don't have to hear a single footfall. I felt that. Then another, closer. Something setting its weight down a step at a time, coming towards me. I heard the huffing again, but it was no longer in the tree line. It was right by my head, just outside the tent. The thinnest fabric mankind has ever devised separated me from something that sounded like it could rip me in half. I lay there with my eyes open, trying not to breathe. I could hear it leaning towards me, the tent wall pressed in against my shoulder. Just barely. I wasn't sure yet if it was its face, or hand, or I don't know what, but even the poles began to creak a hair under it. Then it stopped and stayed like that, leaning on the tent over me, breathing, probably smelling me through the wall. I noticed its smell then too. The worst animal reek you could ever imagine. Like if you piled up roadkill for an hour that you found on the highway and brought it home to microwave for 10 minutes straight. Eventually, it eased its weight back off, slow as it had come, and a good minute later, a knock cracked out from the tree line, once again distant enough. I've never in my life, before or since, come as close to just dying of fright as I did with that wall touching my shoulder. I really think if it had pushed on through, I probably would have died right there. My heart wouldn't take it. After that, I gave up trying to track where they were, and just shook. I prayed too. I'm not usually a praying man, and the words came out a mess, but I said them, and I said them out loud. I thought about Donna. She would probably be sleeping 40 miles away from where I was, and I was reminded I would not be able to call her until I left. Matter of fact, nobody alive knew which mountain I was on, let alone which shelf. I'd kept this spot to myself so well for decades. I was proud of it, until right then. Now I was regretting my secrecy. God, she'd give me till Sunday before she did anything about this, and a day past that before she actually called the authorities. And on top of all that, nobody would know where to start. I lay in the dark with all that stacked up in my mind, and I had to force it out if I wanted any sleep or peace. The knocking continued for most of the night. At some point, the knocking spaced further and further apart, and they finally stopped. But even then I did not feel content or relieved, so I lay there, still shaking, waiting for any noise at all. There would be no sleep. The rest of the night was an exhausted blur, but eventually I heard birds. The woods had come back alive. I finally felt safe enough to move again, and the first thing I did was reach up to my shoulder to where that thing had touched me through the tent wall, like I was going to find some mark or stain. I sat there for a little while longer before I worked up the nerve to put my hand on the zipper. I kept imagining it, still out there, waiting for me to open up. When I finally did it, I did it fast, like ripping off a Band-Aid, and I jumped out, half falling, honestly, with my head swinging left and right to catch any sign of movement. But there was nothing to be seen. My camp was empty, the fire pit was still cold, and the sun beamed through the cedar trees. Whatever those things were, they had walked off and left me for the morning. But I soon realized they'd left messages. The rocks in my fire ring were moved. They hadn't been knocked aside or rooted out by some animal after some grease, like a bear might do, but they had been moved deliberately. For the good part of several years they'd been in a circle, but now they set into a long, curved line, the open side toward my tent. These were larger rocks. I'd have heard them moving around or a man grunting and dragging those, but I had not heard anything, despite being up all night. Yet there they were, in their new, glorious shape. Then I saw my decoys. I'd staked them down at the clearing by the blind, a good 200 yards off and down the slope from here. But both of them were standing in my camp at that very moment. Something had pulled them and carried them up through the dark, and knew to press their stakes into the dirt to make them stand up. It even made them face my tent door, the hen and the Jake, both waiting to greet me as I walked out. I started to look for tracks. If a couple of intruders had decided to invade my campsite, then I would find proof of them being here beyond just them moving things around. The ground around the tent was scuffed up pretty bad. Leaf litter kicked and pressed down in big patches, but the one clear footprint I found was in the soft black dirt at the edge of the fire ring, where I'd splashed my dishwater the evening before. It was definitely a footprint, a bare foot, but my God, it was huge. I've got size 12 boots, but it was longer than my boot by a full hand's length and nearly twice as wide across the ball. 5 toes spread out and dug in deep. The heel had sunk deep into the mud under some real weight. I put my own boot down next to it, just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. My size 12 looked like a child's beside it. My mouth hung open. A bear track you'd know. A man's track you would certainly know. But this was shaped like a stretched-out man's foot, built like nothing that ought to be walking around the Ozarks on 2 legs, and it had been standing right there at the edge of my fire. What in the hell was it? I didn't stand there long. A knock came down from the high side of the shelf above the camp, and another answered it from off in the trees. Then a third from somewhere down the slope, down toward the trail, the only trail, which was the way I had to walk to get to my truck. They had never left. They'd gone quiet and waited me out, my worst fears realized. Now they were spread around the top of that mountain, talking to each other, and one of them was on my way down. I jammed my tent in the pack half-folded, and I grabbed my 2 birds. I wasn't leaving without my birds. I don't care how scared of a man I was. Then I threw on my pack, and I started down. The trail off that shelf switchbacks through oaks for the first stretch. It was steep with loose rock. I went down it fast, with 40 pounds on my back. I kept my head turning, watching the trees on both sides. But then the knocking started up again, behind me. A knock up from where I'd come from, then one off to my left, lower and closer to my level. They were coming down with me, or maybe after me. But they weren't running. I didn't hear anything crashing through the brush, just knocks and something keeping pace. They moved so silently before, but not now. Not when they wanted to be heard. I never saw a single one of them on the way down. About halfway down, that smell returned, and I wanted to vomit. It took me a second to notice the wind. I was upwind, so the smell was coming from ahead of me. There was one below me now. They had me surrounded, front and back. I had to leave the trail. A bad idea most of the time, but I had to do it. Usually you stay on the trail. You don't go busting off into the country. But I wasn't walking down toward that smell, right into that thing's arms or whatever it has. So I cut hard to my right, downhill, straight through the brush toward where I knew the logging cut had to be. I would just have to keep going down. I fell almost immediately. My foot had caught on a root, and I fell hard on a rock, tearing my hand open. I've still got that scar across my palm. But I didn't stop even then. I got up and kept going, dripping with blood down my sleeve. It was then that I heard the screaming for the first time. Holy crap. That screaming was the most terrifying thing I've ever heard in my life. If the knocking and something pushing on the tent was bad, those screams were like something that hell itself concocted. Nothing natural to the forest of any part of the world screamed like that. It came from close behind me and above, and it went up and didn't stop. Even when something that size should have run out of air and stopped, it kept screaming. Every hair on my body stood up. Another scream sounded. One of those things was answering the other call. It came from off to the side, the same kind of scream. This must have been their final warning. I was not wanted here, and I had overstayed my welcome. I ran straight downhill through whatever was in front of me, be it brush or deadfall. I went over a log once, then through a greenbrier patch that opened my arms up, but somehow I didn't even feel it until much later. My pack kept slamming into my back over and over. The birds were swinging about wildly, and the whole time I could hear those things coming. They were crashing through the woods now. No more careful quiet. Multiple huge, heavy things were coming right for me. Things so big and so fast. I knew if they wanted me, if they really wanted me dead, I would have already been dead. They were driving me, like a dog herding sheep. I burst out of the timber so fast I nearly ran past my own truck. I threw the door open and threw the pack in, tossing those two birds along with it. I jumped inside and locked the doors, like that was going to do anything against things this big. I grabbed the steering wheel, getting blood all over it from my palm, and I peeled out of there, tossing gravel behind me. I looked side to side, front and back, through each of my mirrors. But as I drove away, I saw nothing come out of those trees. That was the last time I ever visited my shelf. I never went back there. Decades I'd hunted that shelf, and I'd never heard or encountered anything like that. But all it takes is one time, and I got the message. I was not welcome there. That's my story. I'm sorry if the ending is sort of abrupt, but that's the difference between real life and horror fiction. I got away, learned my lesson, and now I'm sharing that story with you. Again, you don't have to believe me. It's your call. And if you're really wondering what my opinion is and what I think it was, what I think they were, you probably already know the answer. I think it was Bigfoot. Probably a family of Bigfoot, or Sasquatches. I'm not sure what the difference is if there is one. But nothing else makes sense. Was there a family of giant people out there trying to warn me away without a single human word? Or was it the famous cryptid? Who knows? But I ain't going back. You couldn't pay me enough to go back. Thanks for listening. This episode is sponsored by ZocDoc. Raise your hand if you've got a doctor's appointment you've been putting off. Mine has been sitting on my list so long I've actively started pretending it's not there. My usual move when something feels off is 30 seconds of internet searching, 45 seconds of panic, then a final convincing speech to myself that it's probably fine. That strategy has worked 0 times. This year I'll be using ZocDoc instead. ZocDoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you love. With more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states and over 200 specialties, you can search by specialty or symptom, browse thousands of verified patient reviews, and book a real-time appointment that often happens within 24 to 72 hours. If you've been doing the search and spiral thing like I have, ZocDoc is exactly what I'd use. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/unexplained to find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/unexplained. 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 Thanks, ZocDoc, for sponsoring this message. The Face Wearer, from Scary Gab J. So, my entire life I've had paranormal experiences. I come from a long line of witches, some of whom were or are very powerful, and some who do lots of baneful magic. I could sit here all day and send you ghost stories, but I'll settle for this one today. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I lived in a super creepy 2-bedroom house with my mom, dad, and siblings. We found many weird things outside, including human bones at one point. When my sister and I found these bones, my dad said to put them back exactly where we found them, and to not touch them again. I always had a hard time sleeping. I would be up all night some nights. One night, all my siblings were sleeping, mostly on the top bunk, and I was on the bottom bunk with just one of my sisters. I was up, as usual, alone. I think it was around 2 or 3 a.m. I was just laying in bed. Out of nowhere, my dad walks into the doorway of my room and motions his hand for me to come with him. He didn't utter a word, literally just motioned his hand at me. So I got up and went with him to the couch. In my living room, we had a couch and a love seat. My dad sat on the couch and motioned with his hand, patting the couch for me to sit next to him. Again, he wasn't saying a word. We sat there and I watched TV with him in complete silence. The entire time I was watching the TV, my dad was not watching it. Instead, he was staring straight at me. I noticed his eyes did not reflect any light. They were black, pitch black. I did not see any white in his eyes at all the entire time, and I had a very weird, uneasy feeling, like something was very wrong with him. I tried my hardest not to look at him the whole time, but I could see him from the corner of my eye. At one point, he even put his hand on my knee, something he did not usually do. I stayed there next to him for about half an hour, watching the TV. Eventually, I said I wanted to sit on the love seat. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. Then I moved. I ended up sitting out there, feeling creeped out, like something just wasn't right, for another 10 minutes. Finally, I told him that I wanted to go back to bed. My dad again didn't say a word. He sat there silently, motioning for me to come and give him a hug, which I did. He even kissed me on the cheek while I hugged him. He felt very, very cold, not at all a normal human temperature. After that, I went into the hallway. In that hallway, my room and my parents' room were right across from each other. So instead of going to my room, I went the opposite way to my parents' room, just to see if my dad was sleeping. He was. Him and my mother were both in their bed, sleeping. I stared at both of them for a minute before turning away. But standing before me now, blocking the doorway of my parents' room, was the face-wearing entity. It was leaning forward, staring straight into my eyes, only 2 to 3 inches from my face. Its eyes were huge and black, and literally for about 30 seconds, it stood just like that, leaning forward, staring at me, not saying anything, not even blinking. I was so scared, I couldn't bring myself to move or speak. After the most uncomfortable time, it straightened up, showing that it was taller than my dad. My dad is about 6 feet tall, but the way it stood, it was probably closer to 7 feet. It then walked away, heading towards the kitchen, which you need to walk through the living room to get to. I hurried back to my room and forced myself to go to sleep. I didn't have any more experiences like that until years later. I was about 10 years old, and we had moved to a bigger apartment. My grandmother was over babysitting me one day. Inside my parents' bedroom was this huge bathroom. They also had a computer in their room. So I walked out of my parents' bathroom and saw my grandmother using the computer. Like literally the screen was on, and I could hear her typing away on the keyboard. So, not thinking twice about it, I was about to walk out. When I got to the doorway, I stopped in my tracks, because I could see right in front of me my grandmother was sleeping on the couch. Once I saw her there, of course I looked over, and there that thing was again. The same thing that I'd seen pretending to be my dad was now pretending to be my grandmother. It was standing next to me, leaning forward once more, staring straight into my eyes. This lasted for about 15 seconds. Again, it had these huge, pure black eyes. It then turned away, sitting back into the computer chair. It went right back onto the computer, typing at the keyboard. I walked out of the room, and I stayed out for maybe 2 minutes, staying next to my sleeping grandmother. But I did go back into the room, only to find that no one was there. I've never seen this thing again, and to this day I don't know why it chose to show itself to me, or what its motivation was. But it's something that has stuck with me very vividly ever since. Cryptid Connection from Appalachian Princess. The stories I'm about to tell you happened in 2 different decades. One happened in the early 60s to my great-grandpa on my mother's side, who lived in the valley. And the other happened in the late 80s to my grandpa on my dad's side, who lived on the mountain. 2 different stories, but I think they're about the same creature. I'm not sure of the exact years they happened, so I'll do the best I can. I'll tell you what happened and then my opinion. Please let me know what you think. When my great-grandpa built his house in the mid to late 50s, he made what he thought was a good decision to make sure the house was slightly higher up, in the case he had to work on water pipes or some such. Then he wouldn't have to belly crawl. Instead, he could simply crawl on all 4s and sit up to work on anything under the house. The door that led to underneath the house was right under his room at the back of the house. You could look out his window and see the backyard and right up the hill behind the house. At the time, there were trees on the hill back there, and you couldn't see much through them. Of course, those trees are gone now. Back then, there were no streetlights or anything up there, so it was super dark. In the late 60s, there were some incidents where some people's pets were attacked or even killed. When I asked one lady about it, her eyes got really big, and she simply said, "I really don't want to talk about it, honey. We try not to think about that thing." During this time, my grandpa had a little dog he would go squirrel hunting with. He would bring the dog outside and let him run up in the woods, while my grandpa would sit in the swing in the backyard, listening to that dog bark at them. That dog was not an inside dog, and he wasn't an outside dog either. So if Papa hollered for the dog to come back inside, and he didn't come back at night, Papa would just head on to bed, and the dog would come sometime in the morning. It would go in and eat, and head right back out. So according to my grandpa, he had been working on putting lime under the house for mold, and he noticed there was a leak under there from the bathroom. So he had to fix that and left that door open so he could check it later, making sure it wasn't still dripping. When it got dark, Papa hollered for his dog, but the dog did not come. So Papa just went on to bed. At around 2 or 3 a.m., there was a loud commotion that woke Papa right up, pretty much jolting him awake and startling him. He said what he heard next broke his heart. The commotion was crazy, he said. He heard that little old dog not yelping, but screaming. He said he'd never heard a dog scream like that. He grabbed his pistol and a flashlight and ran out the back of the house to that door that led under the house. By the time he got to the door, it had already gone quiet, and he knew that little dog was dead. He said he couldn't hear or see anything at first. Then he knew there was something wrong. There was something else under the house, and it was growling at him. He could smell it too. He said it was one of the worst smells he'd ever smelled before. The way he put it to me was like rotting meat and wet dog. He said he braved it and got down and started crawling under the house, shining the flashlight to see what he could see. He said he could hear it breathing and realized it was very close. What happened next happened in about 10 seconds. He moved the flashlight to his left, and all he saw was black, fur, and big green eye shine run past him. Papa screamed and then retched. The smell was so concentrated and awful, he couldn't help it. Papa back then was part of the fire department. He had seen and smelled some rough stuff, to say the least. He said he sat there for a few minutes and collected himself, and he got to thinking. He couldn't leave that little dog under there. So he went and got what he said was left of it. He didn't want my granny to see that. He wanted to bury the dog, and he would tell her what happened when he went back in. The whole time he was burying the poor dog, he knew that thing was watching him. After all, he could still smell it. When he went inside, my granny was standing there, and she was scared to death. He told her what happened, and finally started to cry for his dog. The next morning when he went outside, his neighbor had come out. Papa went over and told him what had happened. Apparently, he had not been the only one that night who had a pet attacked or killed. According to the neighbor, earlier in the night, a lady on the road across from my papa almost lost her little dog to something. She had been out on the porch, smoking, and she had her dog on a leash. She said suddenly she smelled this terrible smell and began to hear growling. The little dog actually began to shake and tremble and peed itself while running to the porch. She said they went into the house, and she heard all this commotion on her front porch, something scratching and growling. Papa said there were actually deep scratches on her door when he went to check. This went on for a few nights in a row, but just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. There was quite a bit of speculation as to what it was. Could be a mountain lion, a coyote. Someone even said it might have been a small bear, but my papa doesn't believe that. He said it was bigger than a coyote, and he had never seen a mountain lion or a bear ever look or smell like that. He never knew what it was, never found out, but he never wanted to encounter it again. He has since passed away, but he firmly believed it was no coyote, no mountain lion, no bear. Skip to the late 80s. This happened to my grandpa, my dad's dad. The man was an avid raccoon hunter, and he had some of the best coonhounds around. Grand Night Champions, UKC champions, the list goes on. We're talking some expensive and high money-making dogs in the coon hunting world. If you know, you know. For the most part, these dogs were some fearless dogs. My papa and his best buddy would take these dogs out almost every night so they could tree some raccoons. In the off-season, you can't shoot them out to the dogs, so you let them tree them and call them off to go to the next one or to go home. This particular night, he and his buddy took 4 dogs, 2 of my papa's and 2 of his buddies. These dogs were 4 of the best, some of the smartest dogs, so they get to where they're hunting and turn the dogs out. And of course, the dogs do what they do. They sniff, pee, run in a circle, and do the same thing for 10 minutes, till they are all stretched out and ready to go. The dogs were winding something. Then one of the males lets out this long bellow and takes off. The other 3 follow him. So my papa and his buddy are on the back of the truck, listening. To get a better understanding, some raccoon hunters don't walk with their dog. They hang back and they wait for that long bellow, which lets the owner know that they are on the trail of a raccoon. A good hunter will wait for that one specific bellow and know the dog or dogs have a raccoon treed and to go to them. In the off-season, they will either reward the dog with something or let them tree for a while. In season, well, we kind of know what happens. So my papa and his buddy are listening for the dogs to tree and waiting. Well, it's silent for a good while. Then, from what papa said, all hell broke loose. All the dogs started raising Cain all at once, not like they had a coon treed, but like they were fighting something off. So papa and his buddy grabbed their rifles and start to take off to where they heard the dogs, thinking maybe they found a raccoon on the ground and got to fighting over it. They got about 50 yards in, and all this commotion turned into dogs yelping, sounding like they were hurt. Then, suddenly, everything got quiet. My papa and his buddy got still and started to listen again. They smelled it before they saw anything. Papa said it was the most horrible scent ever. It smelled of dead, wet animal. All of a sudden, they heard a noise. It was one of his buddy's females. She was limping and bleeding bad, her tail tucked between her legs. His buddy grabbed up the dog, and they both headed back towards the truck. However, whatever this thing was, came towards where the truck was. When Papa started the truck and turned the lights on, he got a glimpse of this thing. It was black, hairy, and had big green eyes. Whatever the thing was, it was huge, and the smell coming off of it was absolutely horrid. He said he backed out and tore up the dirt road getting out of there. Unfortunately, the female dog didn't make it. Papa said she had too many wounds, and they were deep. He was shaky, but he showered and managed to get some sleep. He told my granny about what happened the next morning, and she too asked if it had been a bear or a mountain lion. Papa told her there was no way in hell it was either of those things. As big as all 4 of those dogs were, they could have taken a mountain lion no problem. His buddy came up about an hour after he told Granny about it. He wanted to go try and find the other dogs, to see if by chance they made it out alive. Papa said he wished they hadn't gone, because the scene that was left looked like an 80s horror film. As for what killed them, they never could find tracks or anything. As an avid raccoon hunter, well, that was over. He got rid of everything but the dogs. He bred them and sold puppies to make his living after that. Scary part is, my papa and his buddy were hunting like a mile from our house, so this creature was very close. Now, I just want to clarify that the trip from the valley where my great papa lived and my papa's on the mountain, as the crow flies, is about a 20-minute trip. To drive it, it would take about 35 or 40 minutes. In other words, you could go across the road to the bluff on the mountain, which would take a 10-minute walk. Then you could look off with binoculars and easily see my great-grandpa's house in the valley. I'm not sure, but I think what was attacking those pets, and what my grandpa saw and smelled, might have been a wampus cat. The glowing eyes, the horrible smell, the quickness and the strength. It all leads me to believe it was a wampus cat. But I didn't see it, so I can't be too sure. But let me know what you think it may have been. Come for the Bigfoot story, stay for the Wampus Cat Massacre, am I right? Sheesh, what a creepy set of stories. Seems like a pleasant night to stay far away from the woods, huh? Good night. Thank you so much for listening to Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails. And you can find my other show, where I narrate scary work-related stories. Search for Tales from the Break Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcasting app, or the brand new Eerie.fm, where you can listen to all EerieCast shows. You can even go there and sign up for premium to support us, unlock bonus episodes and audiobooks only for members. You'll also get no ads whatsoever on all EerieCast content. No Spotify nonsense, no Apple nonsense or whatever. Just good old-fashioned horror without any interruptions. But again, that's members only at Eerie.fm. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. So you may have heard on my other podcast, Tales from the Break Room, that I am sick right now, so this episode is sort of a narration gauntlet. Let me see how many stories I can narrate this week before I feel like I want to die. But before I die, you should definitely head over to Eerie.fm. You can listen to this show, and all the podcasts I narrate or host, and every EerieCast show, all in one place. And you can even sign up to be a premium member, which keeps us alive no matter what other platforms might do. And you get tons of hours of bonus content only for members. In fact, paying members get access to the Unexplained Encounters bonus story catalog. Stories you've never heard before, like the one I narrated a few days ago, which was about a mysterious bag of dog bones and what they made one boy do. That's Eerie.fm. EERIE.fm. Thank you. Haunting at 133 Fifth Avenue, Roebling, New Jersey. From Mark C. When I was younger, about 9 years old, we moved from Levittown, Pennsylvania to 133 Fifth Avenue, Roebling, New Jersey. The house had been abandoned for quite a while when we moved in. My father had some work done on the place, and at one point the workers asked him when he made coffee. There was apparently coffee made on the stove, but he hadn't been there. No one had been. Not long after moving in, my brother and I were there sometimes alone, as my parents would be at bingo at the local firehouse. One night we were both sitting on the couch watching TV, when we witnessed what looked like blood dripping in large amounts from the ceiling, right in front of us. When my brother went over and touched the carpet, the liquid just disappeared. Then as my brother sat back down, we saw shoe prints running across the carpet, and he could see the actual impressions as it happened. Then behind those shoe prints, we saw bare footprints running after those shoe prints. Suddenly our front door blew open, and the screen door was ripped off the hinges. We both got up in our pajamas and ran to the bingo hall to our parents. That wasn't all. There were many occurrences, such as knives sticking to the walls, a hatchet in the back shed door on the inside of the house. We saw one night, my father and us two sons, a woman dressed in a white wedding dress, gliding up the stairs from the first floor all the way up to the third floor and into a room where she disappeared. My father and the two of us also had been awakened many times with some very heavy feelings as the covers were pulled completely off. My father contacted a priest friend of his from the army. He told him to make crosses out of aluminum foil and place them on every door. But then things got much worse. Eventually, my father's friend, the priest, came to bless the house, and he had all of us follow him to every corner in every room as he prayed. He started down in the basement and went up to the third floor. He threw holy water in every corner, and we kept hearing loud bangs and doors shutting. After we finally got to the last bedroom, the priest looked at this mirror, a very old one my father had found in the basement and cleaned up. That's when it all started. So the priest blessed the mirror. Then my father told him how he had found it. The priest said that the mirror was the cause of all these problems, and that he was to give it away, not sell it, but to give it to someone who would willingly take it. He gave us a prayer to say every day, to keep what he said was a poltergeist away. He said that he had researched the house and found it was built on ancient Indian burial grounds. Since my grandmother had recently passed away down the street, he said most likely it was her chasing the poltergeist out of the house. After that night, things became very calm, and even the feeling in the house was no longer heavy. The priest also told us the previous owner had hung himself in the second-floor bedroom years before. We ended up moving out of that house about a year later. We also asked the neighbors, and they told us the stories of the house we didn't know. It was quite an experience as a kid my age back then, so I'm definitely a believer of ghosts and poltergeists now. A horror I left in my childhood, and plan to keep it that way. From Ari. This encounter happened to me when I was around 6, and I tried to forget it ever happened, just so I can try to live a normal life. I would go to my family farm a few days away from my home nearly every year or so. I'd been going to this farm since I was a baby, so this place wasn't relatively new to me, and large dangerous wildlife was an uncommon sighting, but not necessarily rare. I only hope that what I saw that day was just a sick wild dog, maybe some prank pulled on me by the neighbors that lived a little bit away. That day was going pretty normally, except for us getting a few new cows. My granddad was down in the paddocks with them for a while I stayed up at the house with my little sister, who was around 5 years old at the time. We were playing around with the old binoculars that our grandparents happened to have for us, so we wouldn't complain about being bored. At the time, I was spying down on the back paddocks from my house's back patio, as the cows down there had some funky patterns, like funny splotches of black and brown over the white fur, like a canvas with paint splatters, or the pattern my favorite cow had, like a messy heart over her shoulder. It was around 3 p.m. at the time. The shadows were already looming across the closer paddocks, and my granddad had started making his way back to the house, his jeans moving over his shaky legs that had been worn down by time, with his checkered black and red polo shirt that seemed to never age. I didn't pay it much mind as I continued to observe the cows. After a few minutes, the cattle started to go crazy, running around and stomping around with erratic movements. I slowly followed their eyes, and I saw this large dog-like creature with what looked like patchy black fur and deathly gray skin, which made it look like it came straight from the movie series Resident Evil or the movie I Am Legend due to its almost dead look. I watched it run against the fence line of the paddock near the cows with unnerving speed. It scared me out of my off-branded denim dress, as I had never seen a creature of that size or description around here. Luckily, it was on the side with the forest, and electric wires lined both sides of the fence, but I never actually got to get a clear look at what it was. The way it ran sent a shiver down my spine. I never told my parents or granddad either, as I didn't want to be seen as attention-seeking or a liar. I would continue to see it roam around that paddock for a few days, always running across the fence line, almost like it had a schedule it couldn't break. But it never stayed still long enough for me to actually see it. After a while, we ended up selling the house and moving away. I never got to identify the creature, but its unmatched speed and horror film-like run continues to haunt me. To this day, I try to stay away from my old family farm, and if I have to go near it, I'll take a detour. It knew my name. From Anonymous. People always ask why I remember every detail of this story so clearly. Temperature, sounds, even the exact position of furniture inside the shelter. I think your brain records things differently when it genuinely believes you might die. Every second from that night feels burned into me with unnatural clarity. I can still sketch the layout of the room from memory. I can still remember how the air smelled when I opened the door to leave the next morning. Most nights I can ignore it, but every once in a while I'll hear somebody whistle outside my apartment building, and for a few seconds, I'm right back there again. This happened in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan during the last week of January 2022. I'd gone out alone for 3 days to photograph abandoned logging sites buried in the snow. I wasn't inexperienced. I'd been hiking and winter camping since high school, and I usually preferred being alone in the woods. No traffic or people, just the weather and distance. I had a satellite phone, emergency supplies, and extra fuel. I wasn't some idiot wandering into the forest unprepared. The area I chose had once been active logging land back in the 1940s and 50s. Most of the roads weren't maintained anymore, but old maps still showed where the camps and supply structures used to stand. I parked my truck at a locked forestry gate and hiked nearly 7 miles north along a frozen road. Snow reached almost to my knees in some places. The woods there were dense enough to block most of the wind, which sounds comforting until you realize how quiet that makes everything. Even during daylight, the forest felt closed in. Trees packed tightly together, long stretches where you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. Around dusk, I reached the shelter I planned to stay in overnight. It sat beside a narrow frozen creek at the bottom of a shallow basin, surrounded by ridges. The structure itself was old but stable, with cinder block walls, a rusted stove, 2 small windows, and a heavy wooden door swollen from moisture and cold. Somebody had clearly used it recently. There were old food wrappers in the corner and melted candle wax on a shelf near the stove. The weird thing was the silence around the place. I couldn't even hear a bird out there. No distant cracking branches either. Nothing really. And I noticed something else before going inside. Tracks. Bare footprints leading from the creek toward the trees behind the shelter. At first glance, they looked human, but something about them was off. The toes appeared to be too long, almost more finger-like, and the impressions sank unusually deep into the snow. I crouched down to look closer, and realized the stride between each print was enormous, easily 6 feet apart. I remember actually laughing quietly to myself because my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I told myself they had to be distorted somehow, maybe by melting and refreezing snow. Inside the shelter, I unpacked my gear, lit the stove, and tried to ignore those tracks. By around 9 o'clock, the temperature outside had dropped brutally fast. The kind of cold where even stepping outside to pee hurts your lungs. I sat near the stove reading under a lantern for maybe an hour when I heard the first sound. Footsteps moving through snow outside the wall just behind me. Very heavy and slow footsteps. I stopped reading immediately. The footsteps continued past the back wall toward the side of the shelter, crunching softly through the snow. I expected a knock at the door or somebody to call out, but instead, the steps kept circling. One full lap around the shelter, then another. I remember checking my watch because part of me still thought there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe another hiker. Maybe someone lost. Then those footsteps stopped right outside the door. The silence afterward was terrifying. I could hear the stove crackling and my own breathing, but that was all. I stared at the door for about 30 seconds when I heard the faint sound of something near the bottom. Scratching. Slow, raking noises like someone slightly running their fingernails across the wood. And then came the whistling. 3 uneven notes from somewhere outside near the creek. There was a pause after that, followed by the same 3 notes again. I can't explain properly why that sound bothered me so much. It sounded almost human, but lacked the rhythm. I moved to one of the windows, shining my flashlight toward the creek. At first, I didn't see a thing, but then the beam caught movement between the trees. Something pale stepped behind a cedar trunk. It was tall, much taller than a person, thin enough that I could make out the shape of ribs beneath its skin, even through layers of shadow. Its arms looked horrible, hanging nearly to its knees and so thin. What I remember most clearly was how it moved. Not like an animal at all. Animals move naturally, but this thing moved cautiously, as if it knew that I was watching. I backed away from the window right away, and the scratching at the door stopped. A second later, something hit the side of the shelter hard enough to rattle the stove pipe. This was no playful bump, but a full-body impact. It caused dust to drift from the ceiling. The lantern then flickered, and before I could even process what happened, another slam hit the outer wall farther down, followed by quick footsteps, circling the structure at a speed no person should have been able to do, especially in deep snow. The entire shelter groaned under the weight. That was the point where panic really set in for me. I grabbed my hatchet, not sure what I was going to do with it, if that thing out there was really that big. The thing outside stopped moving again. There was more complete silence for a while, until, directly outside the door, I heard a voice speak to me. "Hey." Just one word, coming from what sounded like a man. He sounded calm, and close enough that he may have been standing only inches from the door. I dared not reply. After a few seconds, it spoke again. "Can you help me?" There was this emotionless from the voice, like a terrible actor reading a line, not like a person needing help. But then, in that same voice, it said my first name. I've replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times, but there was no explanation for it. I hadn't seen anyone on the trail, so nobody could have seen my gear, which might have had my name to read. No one had followed me from the trailhead. No one I knew was out here. And as my mind was boggled by what I heard, the door handle began to turn, slowly. But the door didn't open. The handle stopped moving. A few seconds later, something leaned gently against the door from the other side, and I could hear it breathing, whatever it was. And that's when the smell hit me, like a metric ton of various rotting creatures and roadkill. I backed into the far corner of the shelter, while that thing outside began dragging its nails slowly down the wood again. After 3 repetitions, there was silence once more. I waited for a minute, before I heard the footsteps moving away toward the creek. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping that hatchet so tightly, my hand cramped up. Every now and then I'd hear movement somewhere outside in the trees, but never close again. just distant crunching through snow. One time I heard the whistle return far off in the woods, those same 3 notes. When daylight finally came, I opened the door carefully and stepped outside. Tracks covered the area around the shelter. Deep, barefoot impressions circled the building dozens of times. Some passed directly beneath the windows. Others climbed the snowbank beside the wall where something had clearly reached the roof. Near the creek, I found where it had been standing while watching the shelter. The snow there was compressed so deeply, it almost exposed the frozen dirt underneath. And beside those prints were smaller tracks. Deer tracks. Hundreds of them. All stopping abruptly at the creek's edge, as if an entire group had suddenly turned around all at once. I packed my gear and left immediately. About 2 miles back down the trail, I noticed something that nearly made me throw up from fear. A second line of footprints had appeared beside my own in the snow line near the trees. Bare footprints that were fresh. They moved parallel to my footprints for half a mile, and they appeared to have stopped every moment that I had stopped too. I finally made it to my truck just after noon. I remember locking the doors instantly after getting inside, even though I knew how irrational that might be. I was shaking like a leaf anyway. Before pulling away, I got the overwhelming feeling that whatever followed me out of those woods was watching right now. If you're ever alone somewhere remote and the forest suddenly goes quiet, do not ignore it. Don't try to prove to yourself that you're brave. There are places where your instincts notice things long before your mind does. If you ever hear someone outside at night calling your name from beyond the trees, yet so close to the door at the same time, do not answer. The reason I'm scared of the Tooth Fairy. From Willow Tree. When I was around 8 years old, my older cousin told me a story that I would never forget. This story is the reason why I can't sleep well at night sometimes, or ever look at teeth the same way again. My older cousin Jamie was always into scary stories, and always seemed intrigued when I got scared of those stories. But this story goes. Once there was a girl who was normal at first look, but she was peculiar and weird at times. Her family never knew why. Her only friend ever seemed to be her brother. He was the only one she would ever talk to. But for weeks on end, she wouldn't come out of her room, not even for food. She'd always tell everyone to go away. Her brother was worried and started bringing her food. But soon her food requests would get weird. Raw meat and bones in them. She would finish her food and push the plate back under the door. Her brother was getting scared, and each time he heard her eat, it was like it wasn't her anymore. The sounds sounded like they were coming from her throat. One day, her brother noticed a weird, sickly sweet, pungent stench. He knew that smell from when him and his sister found a rotting animal years back. He knocked on her door, asking if she was okay. The voice that came from behind the door sounded raspy and dry, not like the sister he knew. "Give me more meat," the voice croaked. The brother became scared and ran from the room, but something in his head told him to get the meat. It felt safer than just ignoring it. He came back to the room with the plate of raw chicken meat with bones. He wanted to open the door, but he was afraid. Then he pushed the nerves aside and opened the door. What he saw inside was a sight he would remember for the rest of his life. His sister sat in the corner. It looked like she was taller, as if her bones had grown. The skin on her body stretched on the bones. Her ribcage was almost like it wasn't even on her body anymore. The hair on her head had fallen out in clumps, only patches remained. Her head rotated around, her body unmoving, just her head, like her neck had been broken long ago. Her face was the worst part. Her teeth were gone, eyes bloodshot. Where her teeth used to be were bone fragments, shoved into the gums. Her mouth was covered in dry and fresh blood, and her face was so slim you could basically see her skull. He saw something protruding from her back, but looking at her made him sick. He threw the plate and shut the door and ran to his parents and told them what he saw. They went up, knocking on her door. The voice that came out sounded like his sister, completely normal. She told them everything was fine. His parents told him he'd been watching too many scary movies, but he knew what he saw. He knew that wasn't his sister anymore. He went to bed early, trying not to think about what had just happened, but he woke up in the night. Something was dripping on his face. He wiped at it, and the liquid that was on his hand after was red and sticky. He looked up. He saw the thing that used to be his sister, now on the ceiling, like she was floating. He finally knew what the liquid on his face was. Blood. Her blood. She jumped down from the ceiling. He wanted to scream, to get away, but his body would not react. He suddenly saw something weird around her neck. A necklace made of teeth. She opened his mouth, pulling out his teeth one by one, and he couldn't move, even if he wanted to. When she was finally done plucking out his teeth, she said, "Thank you for the teeth," in a voice that was not hers, the same voice he had heard behind that door earlier. He passed out, and the next morning she was gone. The room empty, door open. But now, there was a pile of teeth that did not seem to be hers, smelling of rotting meat and adorning the walls. The boy had to get fake teeth, but he feared for the rest of his life that she might come back one night. My dad's experience with a Ouija board. From Mr. Steiner. I'd like to share a story that happened to my father. For a bit of background, I've always been into the strange and unexplained, from aliens and cryptids, horror and true crime, to parallel universes and time travel. You name it. My dad, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. He does not believe in anything he can't see with his own eyes. That's part of why this story has always stuck with me. He's not the kind of person to make something like this up, especially not a story like this. My father was born in 1955 in Brazil, of German descent. This incident took place sometime in the early 1970s in Sao Paulo, though he doesn't remember the exact year. He wasn't into drugs, at least that's what he says, and I do believe that part. But according to my aunt, he was a bit of a party guy in the younger days. He was always going out with friends. This story, though, takes place at a friend's house. That weekend, it had been raining heavily. A party they had planned to attend was canceled, so my dad and a few friends decided to just hang out at one of their houses and have a few beers instead. There were 4 of them: my dad, 2 guys, A and B, and a girl. B and the girl were siblings, both of German descent on their father's side. B was a big guy, around 6'2" and about 230 pounds, which will be important later. At some point during the night, the girl asked if they wanted to play with a Ouija board. My dad had never heard of one before, so he didn't know what she was talking about. The others agreed, and B went to grab the Ouija board. They started playing, mostly joking around and not taking it too seriously. But then the girl asked the board if she could contact someone on the other side, and the board responded with yes. For about a minute, nothing happened. Just as my dad was about to speak up and call it all nonsense, everything changed. The light bulbs in the house suddenly exploded. All the windows flew open with such force that some of them shattered. My dad said the cold that rushed in was unbearable, completely unnatural, especially considering it was the middle of a hot Brazilian summer. They were all terrified. Then B and the girl's mother walked into the room. Her expression was a mix of anger and concern. Instead of asking what they had done, she told them to go into the kitchen and wait. Apparently, she knew something about voodoo, what many people in Brazil refer to as black magic. Panicked, they did as they were told. From the kitchen, they could hear her chanting in what sounded like Portuguese and Latin. After a while, everything went quiet. Then came a scream, but it didn't sound entirely like her voice. My dad described it as layered, her voice mixed with something much deeper, much more unsettling. She began speaking rapidly in what they assumed was Latin. At that moment, B rushed in, desperate to help his mother. But as soon as he touched her shoulder, she grabbed him, throwing him clear across the room, out of the living room and into the kitchen. You've got to understand, this was a small woman, barely over 5 feet tall, and B, on the other hand, was a large, strong man. What happened shouldn't have been physically possible. That's when my dad and the others ran. They fled the house into the pouring rain, hearing B's mother screaming and cursing after them in that same unnatural voice. As for what happened afterward, my dad never got the full story. He knows that B's aunt was called in, someone who supposedly knew how to handle situations like this, possibly performing some kind of exorcism or ritual. But beyond that, he isn't sure what became of her. B and his sister never spoke about that night again. They avoided the subject completely, and over time, they all drifted apart. The fourth friend didn't have much to say about it either. As for my dad, he still doesn't believe in most supernatural things. But when it comes to that night, all he says is this: he knows what he saw, and whatever it was not natural. The Dog Man That Mauled My Dog. From Gremlin Studios 78. I'm sending this story because it has been weighing on me for years, and no one I tell believes me, though I've only told mostly family. I've always been an adventurous kid. I would always go out to the woods behind our house and play in the creeks and trees in the woods. I pretty much lived back there. You see, my family owned several acres of land around this family-owned cabin we all called the barn. We only farmed on a bit of the land, but the rest was just there, I guess, for us to explore. By the time I was 11, I knew those woods like the back of my hand, and I'd already gone on several hunting and camping trips with my dad. I'd spent several nights in the woods on my own. I had a passion for animals and wildlife, but I also really enjoyed the unknown and the paranormal, although the cryptid side of the paranormal intrigued me the most. The only cryptids I knew about and obsessed over were Bigfoot and Mothman, which weren't really sighted in my area, although there was a family story about a Bigfoot sighting near the barn when my papa was a kid, though there hasn't been other sightings since that encounter. Anyway, we had a dog named Goose. He was a large German Shepherd mix that could be mistaken for a wolf if you saw him in dark light. Me and him were inseparable. We would go hunting, fishing, and camping together, which was great because we have bears in the area, and Goose could scare them off. He had done that before. When I was 16 years old, my cousins were going on a hunting trip, and I was invited to go, now that I was of age. Me and my cousins met at the barn with our camping and hunting gear. I brought Goose along, and my cousin brought his red-bone coonhound, Banjo. We headed out to the hunting grounds. We found a clearing near the creek and set up our tent. By then the sun had started to go down, and it was getting dark. We tied Banjo and Goose to a stake next to our tent and started a fire to cook our dinner. After dinner, we sat in our tent and talked about random stuff. Somehow, we got on the topic of paranormal creatures. This led to a conversation on the story my papa has of a creature on this land. None of us believed there was a creature out here, but even more so, we believed that papa would never lie to us, and this was a story he told in all honesty. My cousin, Audrey, who was the oldest on this trip, started telling the story that we'd heard 100 times, but no one stopped her. When Papa was a kid, he was told never to go into the far side of the woods, but no one would tell him why he couldn't go. He ended up agreeing to a dare from one of his older siblings and went into the far side of the woods. He brought a can of bear spray just in case he came across a predator in the dark. Long story short, he got attacked by what he called a dog man, which is a werewolf cryptid that can't shapeshift and just stays in the form of this wolf-man beast. My papa ran back to his house, and now this story is the legend of the family. After the story was told, we all were a little shaky because being out in the woods after hearing that story Well, it makes you hear things. We ended up telling bad jokes for another hour to clear the mood, then finally went to bed around 10. At midnight, I awoke to this weird feeling in my chest, like I was being watched. I sat up and looked around the tent at my sleeping cousins, and I looked out the flap and out the mesh window into the surrounding darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I still had the feeling that something was out there, watching. I heard Goose and Banjo shift on the other side of the tent, and Goose started quietly growling. I opened up the flap, telling Goose through the mesh that there was nothing. He and Banjo sat closer to the tent than before. In the morning, we all awoke to dew on the tent, birds chirping in the clearing. I crawled out and stretched, breathing in that cool Colorado air. Luke crawled out of the tent after me, and together we untied Goose and Banjo and took them for a walk. "Yo, last night I felt something, like we were being watched," I told Luke. Goose noticed it too. He was growling when I woke up. Luke was quiet, but then he looked at me and told me he had felt the same thing, and he'd also noticed that both dogs had reacted to something when he woke up. "Yeah, around 3, it was still dark, and I woke up to something. Felt like something was watching us. I heard the dogs growl, but I couldn't hear anything other than that. Except at one point I swear I heard the bushes rustling. But I went back to sleep. I didn't hear or feel anything the rest of the night." We walked down the river, then back up to camp. When we got back, Kayla, Audrey, Sydney, and Seth were up and making breakfast, a mixture of eggs, bacon, and potatoes. We ate, then gathered our guns and hiked out to the ridge, where we would start our hunt. I sat in the bushes with my binoculars scouting the area. I could see scratch marks on trees from bucks rubbing velvet off their antlers. I spotted a herd of elk on the ridge across from us. The herd was made up of at least 7 cow elk and 3 bulls, one of which was a large 12-point bull in the front of the herd. The moment I saw that elk, I knew that would be my target. Luke and Seth saw some bighorn sheep on the opposite side of the ridge and started to head over to that area, bringing Banjo with them. Audrey and Kayla spotted some deer on the other side of the ridge Seth and Luke were hunting on. Me and Sydney went straight down to the ridge towards the elk herd, and Goose was trotting next to me. We set up an elk blind built from large branches and camo tarps we brought with us. I sat in the blind, rifle in hand, looking through the scope at the 12-point bull. That bull was about 200 yards away from the blind and standing in a position that gave me the perfect shot. I fired the rifle at the elk. It staggered and began to run, along with the rest of the herd, but we watched it drop about 10 yards from where I shot it. "Nice shot. Came down real quick," Sydney said, giving me a high five and starting to pack up the blind and heading to the elk. I let Goose run over to the downed elk as we packed up and headed his way. When we found the elk, Goose was growling again, but it was a small and scared growl, one I had never heard from him before. I stopped, and so did Sydney. The hair on the back of my neck began to stand up, and a knot in my stomach formed. The same feeling I got when our house got broken into a year ago. Me and Sydney stood there in silence, rifles up, pointing into the woods. Then, interrupting the silence, a crackle came over my walkie-talkie, and I heard my brother Seth's voice coming through the speaker. "Chloe, we headed back to camp and we're packing up. Banjo has been freaking out, and Audrey and Kayla have some weird feelings or whatever. We don't think we should stay here any longer." Me and Sydney looked at each other, then at Goose, then towards the woods that he was staring into and still growling at. "We'll start heading back," I responded to Seth through the walkie, and he said copy that. I whistled for Goose to come over to us, and he trotted over, the hair on his neck standing up, like he was scared. "We have to go. Looks like we gotta leave the elk, I guess," I said, disappointed, walking back through the woods to our camp. Gonna try to come back for it later if I can. We'd only walked about 100 yards before the woods went quiet. Not the kind of quiet where there's a predator in the area, but eerily silent. It felt more like time had just frozen, and I smelled it before I saw it. A tangy, metallic, rotting smell. I covered my nose and mouth with my bandana and tried not to cough. I couldn't attract anything to me and Sydney. Goose growled again, but then it turned into a whimper, like a scared little puppy he was. That's when I saw it. In the trees left of me, a tall, muscular shadow about 7 or 8 feet tall. Its legs were like animal legs bent at the ankle, like it could drop down on all fours and run naturally just like that. Its fur was jet black, its eyes glowing orange. They weren't reflecting anything. They were glowing, I was sure of it. There wasn't much light in the dense forest, nothing that could reflect on that thing's eyes. It was holding on to the closest tree to it with massive raccoon-like hands, with claws like knives on the end of each finger. But its head looked like a wolf's. I've seen wolves before, but this wasn't just a wolf. I reached for my rifle that was slung around my back, and so did Sydney. As I aimed, the wolf thing's lips curled back into a snarling smile, revealing too many yellowing teeth dripping with reddish saliva. The beast let out a guttural growl and stepped forward. It was walking on 2 legs. My hands started shaking, and I aimed my rifle, and so did Sydney. As it drew closer, Goose started growling again. The thing paused and looked away from us, towards the direction of our camp, its nose twitching, making a wet sniffing sound as it sniffed the air, sensing something we could not. It then looked back at us, and slowly got closer. I fired a warning shot to the ground by one of its feet paws, and it took a staggering step back, letting out another growl. It crouched on the ground and rocked back and forth like it was getting ready to pounce. I fired 2 rounds into its shoulder, and it jumped back, letting out an alarmed yelp of pain and staggering slightly back into the trees. Then it howled, this blood-churning scream that echoed through the woods. The thing launched forward again, snarling. Goose jumped in front of us, barking and baring his fangs, and I yelled, "Goose, no!" But he didn't listen. Goose and the beast squared off, both growling at each other. Sydney fired another clean shot at the creature, which yelped, but still fought with Goose. Goose was big and fast enough to dodge all the creature's blows. At the time, I wanted to run. I wanted to get out of there. But I could not bring myself to run away from my dog, my best friend. "Come on, Chloe, we have to go!" Sydney tugged on my arm, but I couldn't pull my eyes away from the fight. Then both of the animals stopped and turned around to face the same direction as the creature looked before. Banjo sprang from the bushes then. He released a type of growl I'd never heard before from him. He lunged at the beast and clamped his jaws on the dogman's neck, and it yowled. Sydney was finally able to pull me out of my trance and drag me through the forest as we ran. Branches whipped at my face and tears formed in my eyes as we ran and burst through the bushes. Eventually, we were able to see our camp. I collapsed in the dirt and sobbed into my hands. I was shaking. Seth sat down next to me and engulfed me in a bear hug. I sobbed into his shoulder, until I finally calmed down enough to walk back to the barn. Luke had called his dad, my uncle, and told him we had a bit of a situation, that we had to leave our camp abruptly, without packing anything up. All 6 of us sat on the porch steps, waiting for my uncle. When he arrived, he and my dad and my Uncle Red asked what happened. Sydney explained her side of the story. So did Audrey and Luke. They told them that we left everything other than our guns at our camp, and Sydney informed them about our encounter, how Goose and Banjo had protected us from a beast. My dad's eyes widened when we told him about the monster. Both of my uncles exchanged glances. They asked us to lead them to camp so we could pack up, and asked me if I wanted to join them, and I told them yes, that I wanted to see if Goose was okay. We loaded up the side-by-side and the ATVs, and we rode to camp, which looked just like we left it. After we packed up all our gear, Sydney and I led the way to where we had the encounter. When we arrived, all the grass and underbrush of where we saw the creature last was now stamped down, like what the hayfields look like after we have a family gathering. The ground was splattered in blood, and there was no sign of that beast at all. But we did find the dogs. Banjo was unrecognizable. His fur was torn and shredded in a bloody mess of fur and mud. and we found Goose next. He was in better shape than Banjo, but still injured badly. His thick coat was covered in blood and scratches, and half his face was gone. He was still breathing, so we wrapped him up in a blanket, and Uncle Red rushed him out of the woods to the vet. When we got back home, we buried Banjo in Luke's backyard. My cousins and I never went back to that spot, or even in those woods again. I still hear those howls of that beast, those eyes burned into my memory. Goose thankfully survived, although he lost the left side of his face and his left eye, along with one of his legs. I don't go out there at night anymore, and even after moving recently to a close neighborhood in the city, I don't like to leave my house without a handgun and my new dogs. To end this, let me just say, if you ever get the feeling you're being watched, and your dog begins to growl at something that you can't see yet, or if the woods go completely and unnaturally silent, get out of there before it's too late for you or the people and the animals you love. The light that brought a feeling with it. From Why Time. I used to live in a small town in Tennessee. Around 2024, when I was about 13 or 14 years old, my family had just sold our home. Because of that, the 6 of us ended up moving into a small shed that had been converted into a house. It wasn't meant for that many people, so space was really tight. My siblings and I all slept together in the living room, while my parents took the only actual bedroom. It always felt a little off living there, not necessarily haunted or anything, just uncomfortable sometimes, like it was a little too quiet at night, especially with the fields stretching out behind the house. One night, I woke up randomly in the middle of the night, feeling really thirsty. I don't remember what time it was, but I know it was deep into the night. Everyone else in the house was still sleeping, and everything was completely silent. I lay there for a minute, listening, but there was nothing. No movement, no talking, not even any outside noises. Eventually, I got up, and I walked into the kitchen to get some water. Our back door was a sliding glass door, and you could see straight out into the field behind our house. As I walked into the kitchen, I happened to glance outside, and I noticed a light. At first, I didn't think it was anything crazy. My grandma lived in a camper next to the house, so I thought it was probably her. I thought maybe she couldn't sleep, so she was walking over to grab something. But the more I looked at it, the more it didn't make sense. The light wasn't coming from her camper. It was coming from farther out, from the cow field behind our house. I stopped and just stared at it for a moment. It was moving, for sure, slowly but steadily coming closer. But it didn't look like a flashlight, and it did not move like someone walking. There was no beam or swinging motion, just a steady glow, and the shape of it wasn't right either. It didn't really have a shape. It was just light, kind of shapeless, almost like a glowing presence instead of something physical. As it got closer, I started to feel something that I can't fully explain. At first it was subtle, but then it hit me all at once, a heavy feeling of loneliness and despair. It didn't feel like my own emotions either. It felt like something was being forced onto me, like the air around me had changed. It was overwhelming. I remember standing there, frozen, staring out the glass door at this thing getting closer. But I didn't run, and I didn't call out to anyone. I didn't move. Then it reached the fence, and it didn't stop. It passed right through, like it wasn't even there. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. My heart was racing, but my body would not listen. I was stuck there, watching as it kept coming. It reached the back of the house, and then it went straight through the sliding glass door, entering our home. The feeling got even stronger as it passed by me. It was like being hit with a wave of pure emptiness. What made it even worse was that it didn't react to me at all. It didn't look at me. It didn't slow down. It was like I wasn't even there. It kept on moving, drifting past me into the living room, where my entire family was asleep. For a second, I remember thinking it might do something to them, But it didn't. And it kept going. Never hesitating, never interacting with the thing. It kept going in a straight line. Then it reached the front of the house, and just like before, it passed straight through the front door and disappeared. The moment it was gone, that feeling disappeared too, just like that. I stood there for a long time after it left, trying to understand what I'd just seen and what I'd felt. I didn't go back to sleep for some time. I kept thinking about how wrong it all was. I never told anyone about it. In my family, ghost stories and things like that were usually brushed off or ignored, and I didn't think anyone would take me seriously. But I know what I experienced. I've experienced other unexplained things that I might share in the future. So thank you for giving people a place to tell their stories. Well, we basically made it to a full episode, right? Maybe a few minutes short. Thank you all for sticking through this with my nasally sounding voice, I'm sure. This has been Unexplained Encounters, and I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Send me your scary unexplained stories at darkstories.org, and support my show and unlock extra Unexplained Encounters stories over at Eerie.fm. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. A new episode of Fractured Reality, hosted by yours truly, is available now over at Eerie.fm, but it's only for premium members. The episode features encounters with real-life glitches in our world, specifically a glitch where a pilot is told there is someone on board who simply does not exist. Catch the disappearing person at 35,000 feet on Eerie.fm right now, members only. Sign up to be a premium member for tons of extra stories only for my supporters, or just head over to listen to all your favorite EerieCast shows in one cozy place. We're taking creepypasta submissions right now for a contest until the end of May. First prize gets $1,000, second and third get $300. To participate, go to Eerie.fm/contest, make sure you have an account and log in, and send us your best original and scariest creepypasta. Looking forward to it. What makes deer so unnerving? I think it's their eyes. Big, dark, staring eyes that see beyond what they look at. It forces you to feel as if you're prey along with them. This story sent to me by Simply Ryan, called The Deer in My Backyard, is a disturbing and strange tale. In it, a man discovers his father's new obsession with taxidermied deer, which he sets up outside in the yard. But there's a very good reason they face away from his father's house. Something else is out there, and it wants in. My father took up taxidermy when I was about 10. He had been a hunter since he was a kid. He loved going out alone before dawn and coming back at mid-morning with a deer on the front of his truck and a thermos of coffee that had gone cold by then, which he'd never finished. He started doing his own shoulder mounts to save the cost of paying the taxidermist in town, and the first few were, well, I'll just say rough. The eyes always looked demonic. That's the way I'd put it, and he hated it when I said that. The ears also were lopsided. But he kept at it. By the time I was a teenager, he was doing other people's deer too, for $50 a head, and he was reasonably good at it. I mean, he never made his living off of it, but he had a sideline for years. He stopped hunting about 18 months before any of what I'm going to tell you. He didn't say why, never did. I asked him on the phone one Sunday, and the most I could get him to say was he got tired of it. I asked him a couple of weeks later, and he said the same thing. So I just didn't ask anymore. He was 68 by then. I figured he had earned the right to be tired of anything he wanted to be tired of. When I was a kid, I spent hours in the garage with him while he worked. I would sit on a stool in the corner and watch him and ask him questions about what he was doing. Sometimes so many questions he would get a little bit irritated. But most of the time he was game. He would tell me about which side of the hide to flesh first, and how to set the ear butts, and what the difference was between a tanning agent or a preservative. He let me handle the fleshing knife when I was 11, and he let me attempt my first mount when I was 14, a squirrel I'd killed with my BB gun. It wasn't very good. A cousin of mine called it Frankenstein's squirrel. But my dad told me I would get better at it if I kept at it. I didn't keep at it. By the time I was 16, I'd moved on to cars, music, and of course, girls. So the garage was his alone again. He never seemed to mind too much. He just kept doing his work. I'm his only son. I have a sister who lives in San Diego and has not been back to see mom or dad in 4 years. My wife and I live about 90 minutes from the place I grew up, in a small house I bought before we got married. My wife does clerical work. I work in motor vehicle parts. We have 2 boys, who I'll call C and E. C is 11 and Eli is 7. I hadn't been back to my dad's house in about a year when my mom fell. She had been carrying laundry up from the basement. She missed the second step from the top, and she came down on her left hip on the landing. Dad heard her fall and ran to her. Turned out her hip was broken in 2 places. They had her in surgery that night, 3 days in the hospital. The orthopedic surgeon told her she would need 6 to 12 weeks of careful recovery, and she would not be able to use stairs or carry anything heavier than a coffee cup, and she would need somebody around for the first month or so. Now, Dad was capable of helping her with most of it, but he was 69 and had his own bad knee. Truth was, he wasn't going to be able to bend her socks on for her or get her in and out of the tub, and that's just a couple of basic things. My wife and I discussed it heavily one night. She worked for the school system and had the summer off. The boys had summer break too. I had some vacation banked and FMLA available, so we agreed to go up for 3 weeks. After that, we convinced my sister to fly out from San Diego for a week. After that, we would have to figure out home care if Mom still needed it. The house had 2 spare bedrooms. It would work. It wouldn't be fun, but it would work. I called Dad the next morning to tell him we were coming. He said good and that he appreciated it, and that he'd see us Friday. Now, the 2 of us had been having phone calls every 2 or 3 weeks for the past year, and he never really talked about much. So I wasn't really prepared for what I saw when I got there. My dad's house is at the end of a gravel road, 3 miles off the state highway. The road climbs the side of a low ridge and crosses a creek twice on a 1-lane bridge. The trees on both sides are mostly maple and hickory, with some white pine mixed in. There are 4 houses on the road, including my dad's. He has 37 acres at the end of it, most of it woods, with a clearing of about 4 acres where the house and the barn and the outbuildings are. The driveway turns off the gravel road and runs up an incline for about 100 yards, which goes through hardwood trees, then opens up into a clearing. I saw the first deer where the driveway opens up. It was a 6-point buck, standing about 10 feet to the right of the driveway, on the edge of the lawn. Its eyes were glass. Its fur was matted, and a piece was missing from its left shoulder. It faced away from the house, looking out towards the woods. I slowed the truck. "What is that?" my wife said. "God, that's one of my dad's mounts." "But why is it in the yard?" she wondered. I didn't have an answer. I drove a little further. There was another one to the left of the driveway. This one was a smaller doe with 1 ear missing. Past that was another buck, in the middle of the yard near the well house. Then another. As we came up to where the driveway fully opened in front of the house, I could see the whole clearing. There were mounted deer everywhere. They were placed at intervals around the perimeter of the clearing, all of them facing outward toward the woods. I counted them as I drove. There were 12 in the front clearing alone, with more visible at the corners of the house, going around to the back. The boys were quiet in the back seat. I looked at my wife, and my wife looked back at me like, what is going on? We saw my dad sitting on the front porch. He was in his rocking chair. He'd had that thing for 30 years, a green metal rocker that had been painted 3 times. He had his hands folded in his lap. He was wearing overalls and a John Deere hat. He had his rifle leaned up against the wall behind him, in the corner between the screen door and the porch post. I parked and got out. The boys got out happily behind me, ready to stretch their legs. My wife got out and went around to the back of the truck. "Hey, Dad," I said to him. "Son?" He sounded a little hoarse. He stood up from the rocker. He came down the steps slowly, meeting me at the front of the truck. He gave me a big hug. Then he hugged the boys one at a time, then my wife. He turned around to the door. "Come on in. Your mother's been waiting for you." It was funny at the time, but he didn't say anything about the deer. I guess to him it was just decor. We unloaded the truck. I took the bags up to the spare bedrooms. That house had not changed in the year since I'd last seen it. The rugs were in the same places, photos in the same places, and the same photos. The kitchen smelled like that same brand of dish soap I grew up with. We found my dear old mother in the dining room, which had been converted into a sick room. There was a hospital bed where the table used to be, and there was a walker beside the bed. Her left leg was in a long brace that went from her hip to her ankle. She was thinner than the last time I'd seen her. Her hair had gone wider at the part. She had her glasses on and she was sitting up, with 3 pillows propping her up. She was reading a Joyce Carol Oates paperback. "Hey, Mom, you doing okay?"
Just get over here."
I leaned down and she put her arms around my neck and held on for a while. The boys came in behind me. She got C's face between her hands and then E's. She held my wife's hand after that.
"Oh, I'm terribly sorry about all this fuss,"
she said. "Oh, don't be." I gave her a smile, letting her know it was all right.
"I am sorry, though."
"Mom, stop. If you don't have family, who do you have?" I repeated the phrase she had told me when I was a kid. Thing is, she didn't mention the deer either. I asked her how she was feeling exactly. She told me about the surgery and the rehab schedule and the medications she was on. She told me what the physical therapist had said about her recovery. She did all of this without even mentioning that there was a dozen taxidermied deer arranged around the house and that my father was sitting on the front porch with a rifle behind him. I went back outside to help my wife with the last of the bags. The deer in the yard still faced away from us, looking out to the trees. I walked out a ways, stopping at the 6-point buck at the edge of the driveway. It was clearly my father's work. I examined the details. The eye placement was a little too high. The line of the seam down the back of the neck was visible if you looked for it. The hooves had been set in some kind of dark resin that had been formed into rough blocks, painted to look like the ground. The whole thing was secured to the lawn by what looked to be rebar stakes through the resin blocks. I bent down and felt the back of it. The hide was, in fact, real. So was the fur. It had been done by hand and finished by hand and placed here on purpose. The next one over, the doe with one ear, had clearly been out in the weather longer. Its hide was sun-bleached in places, and there was moss starting on the resin at the base. I straightened up. My wife was standing at the back of the truck holding E's stuffed rabbit. She looked at me. "We're gonna have to talk about this," she said. "Yeah, I expected as much," I replied. She put her hands on her hips. "Right now. Not in the yard." The first night I asked my dad about the deer. We were on the porch after supper. My wife was inside helping Mom get ready for bed. The boys had eaten and gone upstairs to the spare bedroom to set up their plastic animals on the dresser. C had said about 6 words at dinner. E had said maybe a dozen, and most of them were about the deer in the yard. The dog, an old beagle named Patches, who had been my mother's idea 12 years ago, was lying on the porch by my dad's feet. "So, Dad," I sat down beside him. They didn't have a spare chair, so I just kneeled on the porch. "What's with all these deer out here?" "Been working on them," was his simple answer. "Yeah, I can see that. But why?" "Just something to do." He cleared his throat. Sounded pretty gross. "But there's so many. What do you mean, something to do?" "There's 14. "Okay, 14. Why did you put 14 of them out here?" He cleared his throat again. "Well, it just feels right with them around. I don't see what the issue is." "Well, I've never seen anyone do something like this before. You used to put your mounts in the den." The old man shook his head at me. "I changed my mind on where I want to put them." "All of them? Outside and facing the woods?" He nodded. "Dad, that's not normal. What's going on?" He stopped and glared at me, but then his face looked more tired than irritated. "I'm gonna ask you to leave that alone for tonight. You've been driving and your wife is tired, so are the boys. Your mother sure is glad to see you. We're not gonna talk about this anymore tonight. And that was that, at least for now. All right, Dad. Have a good night. You too. I'll be in a moment. Just gonna walk the property before bed. He stood up and grabbed his rifle. Oh, I can come with you if you want, I asked. He shook his head. You sure? Sure. Patches. Come on, boy. The dog got up off the porch, stretching his obviously achy joints, and trotted down the steps. My dad walked down after him. He went around the side of the house to the right and disappeared past the corner. I watched, seeing if he would come back anytime soon, but he didn't, and I figured he'd gone all the way around to the back. I'd said goodnight, but I kind of wanted to sit on the porch a bit longer. The dark came in. I could hear my dad's footsteps somewhere off in the back of the property, the crunching of gravel and leaves in an old man's gate. He came back, but it took him 40 minutes. The dog came back up the steps first. My dad came up after him. I thought you went to bed. Dad, I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Oh, I'm fine, boy. Let's get on to bed. So I went. My wife and I were in the small guest bedroom at the back of the house. The boys were in the larger spare across the hall. The bed was a double, smaller than what we had at home. My wife was lying on her side facing me. So, did you figure out anything? You wouldn't answer any questions, I told her. You had no idea about all these deer, huh? I sighed. No, I didn't. He's always mounted his own deer for a long time, but I didn't know he was sitting them in the yard. We've been on the phone almost every week. He's never said the word deer, I'm telling you. My wife rubbed her eyes. And what's he doing with that rifle right next to him all the time? I shrugged. Did you ask about that? No, hon. He said he was walking the property and he took it with him when he did it. Maybe he just does his rounds throughout the day. Rounds for what? Her hand shot up with a demand for an answer. Well, he didn't say that either. She was clearly agitated, and I couldn't blame her. My dad was being very suspicious. I don't know if we can stay here, she said. I'm not saying we go tonight. I'm saying I don't know if we can stay the whole 3 weeks, like we thought. She crossed her arms and lay in bed. I sat down next to her. I don't blame you, to be honest. Just give me a while to figure out what's going on. Okay, but try to do it quick. Your dad's freaking me out. I gave her a half smile. We went to sleep. I slept badly. I woke up around 3 with the feeling I'd heard something, so I went to the window to check. The window looked out the back of the house, across the backyard and toward the woods. There was mist coming up from the creek that ran along the back of the property. The moon was up and behind the clouds, and the light was diffuse. I could see the back fence and the tool shed, and those 2 deer that were placed near the tool shed. Seeing them again in the night out there made me worry. What was wrong with my dad? I stood at the window for a few minutes. The yard was so still and quiet. Eventually, I went back to bed. In the morning, I counted the deer again. There were 15 now. He'd added one. I walked the perimeter of the clearing to check. The new one was on the back side of the property, on the line between the backyard and the woods. It was a 4-point buck. The fur was clean and the eyes were set straight. The hide was tight on the form. It looked recent. The resin at the base was darker than the resin on the older ones. Newer. I walked over to the garage. My dad's garage is a detached building about 20 yards from the house. He built it himself in the 70s when I was a baby. It has 2 bays, the right one for the truck and the left one for his work. The work side had a long bench under the back window with shelves above it, and a pegboard with his tools. The smell was the same smell I remembered from my childhood, sawdust and preservative, with a touch of machine oil on top. My dad was at the bench. He had a deer hide spread out in front of him. He was working on it with a fleshing knife. He had a respirator pushed up on his forehead, and he didn't look at me when I came in. Hey, Dad, good morning. I noticed there was a new deer out by the tool shed. I brought it up immediately. He focused on his work. So, where did that one come from? Found it. Back of the property. Dead already. Oh, well, what killed it? No idea. You think someone shot it? No. Do you think an animal got it? Instantly, he set his knife down. and stopped working on the hide. He looked out the back window of the garage, then to me. He looked stern. "I'm going to ask you again to leave this alone." I was about to speak, but he put his hand up. "I know you got questions, and I don't have answers for you that are going to be satisfying. The questions you are asking me are not questions I'm going to answer this morning. Maybe at some point in the next few weeks I'll tell you something, since you're going to be here for some time. But not this morning. I've got to get this hide cleaned before the day warms up." I rolled my eyes. "All right, Dad." I left the garage. By the end of the first weekend, I'd stopped asking my dad about the deer, and I began to watch them instead. I would count them when I could throughout the day. The count went up by 1 on Saturday night, and it went up 1 more on Monday night. By Tuesday morning, there were 18 deer. The new ones would appear usually in the morning, between the time my dad went to bed and by the time I got up to start the coffee. He went to bed around 11. I got up around 6. There was a window of about 7 hours in which a 4-point buck or an 8-point buck, or once a yearling doe, would arrive on the property and be in the backyard or beside the tool shed when I came out to look. I never once saw him place one. I never heard anything in the night either. The hides were always perfect. The eyes were always still bright. The bodies were always whole and unmarked, as if the animals had laid down on their own and let Dad take them. Our boys were acting different. E was outside most of the days. He had picked the new 4-point buck behind the tool shed as his favorite, and even named it Henry. He sat in the grass next to Henry and read out loud from his picture books. He told my wife at lunch one day that Henry liked the one about the monkey best. My wife told him it was sweet that he liked the deer, but that these deer were not toys, and that he should be respectful around his grandfather's stuff. E said he was respecting them, that they weren't toys, obviously. They were his friends. It sounds weird, but he would say it with the seriousness of a 7-year-old. So maybe it was just a kid thing, I thought. As for C, he was inside most of the time. He sat on the couch with his book or his handheld game, and he didn't want to go out. When my wife asked him if he wanted to walk down to the creek with her and E, he said no thanks. When I asked him to come help me carry the recycling out to the bin, he came out, but he kept his eyes on the ground the whole time, walking fast, and was back inside as soon as the bin lid closed. I asked him at dinner on Monday if he was feeling okay. He said he was fine. He didn't look at me, though, when he said that. "Hey, bud, you sure?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. He smirked and nodded his head. "I'm sure, Dad." "Are you sleeping okay? I know it's hard to sleep at a new place." He nodded again. "You can tell me if something is bothering you, okay?" "I'm okay, Dad," he said. I let it go. My wife caught my eye across the table. My dad was eating his pork chop and didn't look up. That Tuesday night, C had a bad dream, and he came into our room around midnight. He stood in the doorway in his pajamas, and my wife sat up, saying, "Come here, baby." He came over. He sat on the edge of the bed, and my wife put her arm around him. "Was it a bad dream? Tell me what it was about." He stared at the floor, and he said something really creepy that I tried not to take too serious. "There was a man in the woods. A tall man." "Tall like how, honey?" "Tall like a tree?" My wife looked at me over his head. "Well, what was this tall man doing?" "He was looking at me." "From where?" "From past the deer. He was past the deer in the yard. He was just standing there. The deer were between him and me." "Was he doing anything else?" "No, he was just looking. But I could feel him looking, even before I saw him. I knew somebody was looking, and then I looked, and he was there." My wife pulled him closer, rubbing his back. "It was just a dream, baby." He nestled his head into her chest. "I know, Mom. You want to sleep with us tonight?" "Can I?" They both looked at me. With a grin, I nodded. He climbed into bed between us. He went to sleep faster than I expected. I lay there in the dark for an hour after that, listening to him breathe, and listening to this house, and of course making sure I heard any noise that might come from outside. The mist had come up from the creek again. I could see it through the curtain when I turned my head. I went out on the porch around 2 a.m. My dad was already there. He had the rifle across his lap now. He rocked in his rocker like usual, not looking at me when I came out. I asked him how long he'd been out here so far. He just gave me basic answers like, a while. Said that nothing's happened so far, even though I'm not sure what something might be. And when I asked what he was doing, he just said, "Same thing I do every night, son." When I asked what that was, he just rocked. I sat down on the porch step. The dog came out from somewhere and lay down next to me with his head on my thigh. The moon was up and the mist was up again, and I could see the front yard pretty clear. The deer were in their places. The closest one was the original 6-point at the edge of the driveway. The one past it was a doe with a missing ear. Past that, the yard sloped down a little, and the deer at the edge of the yard were partly hidden in the mist. I sat there with my dad watching the yard. The mist moved a little, slowly, with no wind to really push it, from what I could tell. And it was around then that I saw movement behind the deer. It was past the yard in the trees, at the edge of the woods where the property line was. It wasn't an animal moving through the trees, but something the height of those trees, or close to it, moving between them. I saw the shape of it go behind one trunk, then come out on the other side. The shape was the shape of a man, except twice as tall as a man. It did not come out into the yard, but it stayed in the trees. I lost it in the mist after a few moments. Immediately, I looked back to my dad. He was watching the same direction I'd been watching. He gripped the rifle in both hands hard, but he was not yet pointing it. He was just holding it across his lap with both hands tightly. You saw that, right?" I asked him. He nodded, then said, "Go inside." When I tried to speak up, he shook his head at me and said more sternly, "Go inside now." The way he commanded me then made me feel like a kid. I listened. I went inside and I lay next to my wife and C, who was still asleep. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there and I went over what I'd seen. That shape and the height of it. What in the world was that? A weird trick of the light and shadows? In the morning, my wife was up before me. She had C in the kitchen eating cereal, and E was outside, of course. My dad was in the garage again. Mom was in her bed with her physical therapist, who came 3 mornings a week. My wife sat down next to me at the kitchen table after she had cleared C's bowl. "Tell me what happened last night. You're acting weird." I told her, and I didn't leave anything out. I said exactly what I'd seen, and how oddly it resembled C's dream. Her eyes were wide and drifted off for a few seconds before she replied, "I think we need to leave." "I know," I told her. "How fast can we leave?" "Well, let me talk to my dad." "Today," she said. Today, I got it." I went out to the garage after the physical therapist left. My dad was at the bench. He was stretching a new hide over a form. He had the respirator down around his neck. "Dad, I need you to tell me what you saw last night. What I saw," I demanded from him. He set the hide down and turned toward me. "Son, I don't know what it is. I've never known. I've had 1.5 years to figure it out, and I haven't. So I'm not holding anything back from you, I promise. I just don't know." "What are you talking about? What happened 1.5 years ago?" I asked. "That's when it started. I came home from hunting, and there was a deer in the yard, the front yard. A dead buck, but there was no mark on it that I could find. I called old Mason up the road. He came over and looked at it with me, and we couldn't figure out what had killed it. He thought maybe it had a heart attack. Deer do have heart attacks sometimes." I said sure. I put it in the bed of the truck and took it to the garage, and I dressed it out. A week later, there was another one, same as the first, dead and no markings. I called Mason again, and Mason did not come this time. I think he decided he didn't want to know what was going on, so I dressed that one too. The next time, it was a week after that. Then it was every couple of days. Then they started coming faster than I could process them. I had to start preserving them whole, since I didn't have the freezer space for the meat and I wasn't going to leave them to rot. After the third one I found, I saw it. I was out on the porch one night with a flashlight, trying to see if I could see what was bringing these dead deer here. I saw it at the edge of the trees for about 10 seconds. It was tall enough that I knew I was looking at something I didn't have a name for, and I could feel it watching me. I thought of C's dream then, and I tried not to let my dad see that I had shuddered. After it left, I didn't go inside for a couple of hours, since I didn't feel like I could move yet. It was such a strange sensation. When I did go inside, I told your mother. She believed me, but she didn't see it that night. However, she has seen it before. I didn't know what to say. What is it? How often does it come here? I've seen it every night for the last 12 months now. He looked down at his feet. Every night, I muttered. Yes, every night. Sometimes for a long time, sometimes for just a few seconds. Sometimes it stays in the trees, and other times it comes out into the yard a little ways. It has never come up to the house, though. The deer in the yard are between it and the house, and it has never come past any of the deer in the yard. Are you saying the deer keep it out? I'm saying it has never come past the deer in the yard. I do not know what is keeping it out. I have a theory, but I'm not sure. What's the theory, Dad? This sounds insane and serious. I was starting to grind my teeth from stress. It leaves me the deer. I do what is to be done with the deer, and I put the deer in the yard. The deer stays in the yard, it stays in the trees. We have a kind of arrangement, even if neither of us has spoken about it out loud, since I cannot speak to it, and I don't even know if it can speak. I'll tell you one more thing. Then I'm going to need to get back to this hide. There was a stretch in February when it did not bring a deer for 9 days. I don't know why. I had run out of work to do, so I cleaned up my garage and I sharpened my knives. I waited. On the 6th night, I saw it standing in the front yard. Not in the trees, but in the yard, about 40 feet from the porch. It stood there for about an hour. I sat on the porch with the rifle and I watched it, watching me. After an hour, it went back into the trees. The next morning, there was a deer behind the well house. I do not know what was different about those 9 days. I do not know what brought it closer or what put it back. I've stopped trying to figure out what makes it do what it does, and I just do the work it leaves. Dad, this sounds crazy. I would be sitting here calling you crazy if I hadn't seen it myself. C has been having dreams about it. My dad looked worried then, but I continued. My wife wants to leave today. You should leave today. I've been waiting on you to say that, to be honest. You should leave too, with Mom. I'm not gonna leave. This is my house. Your mother's in this house. I'm not gonna leave my house since something has set up shop in the trees. I'm gonna do what I've been doing. If I have to do it for another year, I'll do it for another year. If I have to do it for 10 years, I'll do it for 10. What does Mom think about this? I asked. As I said, your mother has since seen it at least once. Your mother knows about it, has known it for at least a year. Your mother and I have talked about this between ourselves and we've made our decisions. You should have told me before I came out here. I should have. I really should have, and I'm sorry I didn't. I'm gonna pack up my family and leave as soon as possible, I said. He nodded. I can call Aunt Janet about coming up to help Mom for a couple of weeks, until my sister gets here. Okay. He just kept nodding. Dad, what if it comes inside? What even are your plans for all of this?
It hasn't come inside yet.
I know it hasn't, but what if?
I couldn't tell you.
I squeezed my eyes shut, then turned around and headed back to the house. I told my wife about the conversation, and we began to pack the boys' bags. We had been there for 4 days. I went to my mom's room. She had her glasses off and a book in her lap.
"He's told you everything, hasn't he?"
she said, seeing the look on my face. Yep. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't either of you tell me? She closed her book. You should come with us, Mom. I don't want you or Dad to be here.
I can't. You know I can't do stairs right now, and you don't have a downstairs bedroom. I'm not gonna be hauled around like a sack of potatoes. And your father's not gonna leave no matter what I say. I'm not gonna leave without him either. So that's the end of that.
Okay. I paced around the room. Well, Aunt Janet's gonna come up, cover our weeks before my sister gets here.
That's fine. I'll see Janet then. Go on. Take your boys home. And your wife.
I hugged her and kissed her on the cheek. My dad helped me carry our bags down to the truck. He didn't say much. The boys were already in there, and my wife was up at the porch saying goodbye to Mom through the open front door. Since we decided not to have the boys come in for a second goodbye, because that would set E off. The screen door was propped open with one of the rubber wedges my dad had been using for the screens. He put the last bag in the bed of the truck, and he stood there with his hand on the tailgate. I'll call you when I get home, I told him.
If you ever change your mind about staying, the spare bedroom is yours.
I know that, and thank you, but I think we have to go.
Well, y'all take care. Sorry, son.
It's all right, Dad. Love you. He pulled me into a hug. My wife came down the steps past him and got in the truck. I got in too. I backed out of the driveway and turned the truck around in front of the house. The deer in the yard were in their places still. My dad was on the porch in his rocker then. He started to cry when we got to the end of the driveway. He wanted to bring Henry home with us. I told him Henry had to stay with Granddad. He kept crying for 20 minutes after we got on the gravel road. By the time we hit the state highway, he was quiet, looking out the back window. C sat in the front passenger seat next to me. My wife was in the back with E. Suddenly, my wife asked the boys if they wanted to stop at Wendy's. So we stopped at Wendy's, and the boys ate, and we drove on. We got home around 8 that night. I carried E up to bed, since he had fallen asleep in the car. C went up by himself. He hugged me at the bottom of the stairs first, which he hadn't done in over a year. I held on to him for a few seconds. I enjoyed that. Then he went up. My wife and I sat in the kitchen, not saying much, but we had a glass of wine each. She went to bed before I did. I sat at the kitchen table for another hour, then called my dad. I told him we were home. He was happy about that, and said that Mom was sleeping at the moment. I let him know I'd call him tomorrow, told him to be careful. As promised, Aunt Janet came up that next week. She's my mother's younger sister, 65 and divorced, and retired. She stayed for 10 days. After that, my sister finally arrived, and she was there for the rest of my mom's recovery. My mother was back on her feet by the middle of the summer. She used a cane for another couple of months. By fall, she was walking the property without any help. I called my dad every week. He didn't bring up the deer, and neither did I. We talked about my mom's recovery and my work and the boys. I asked him after about a month if he was still doing the same thing, and he told me yes. I asked him if it was the same as before. He said it was. And I asked if he'd been sleeping okay, or at all. And of course, it was the usual. And that's where I left it. I didn't go back up there. My wife didn't want to go, and she didn't want me to take the boys anymore. We talked about having Mom and Dad come down for a long weekend once Mom was strong enough to make the trip. But my mom didn't want to leave the house for that long, and Dad would not leave it at all. So we kept it over the phone. C was different that summer and into the fall. He slept with his door open and the hallway light on. He didn't want to be alone in the basement to do laundry. He was sleeping with the door closed again by the middle of fall. He never asked me about the tall man, and I think he made a decision at some point that he was never going to ask, that he wanted to try to forget it. E took longer. He talked about the deer for weeks after we got home, then about Henry the deer specifically. Henry liked the picture book about the monkey. Henry liked the song Guy's first grade class had learned about a frog. Henry was a good listener. My wife told him gently after a while that Henry was at Granddad's house, and he could think about him, but he had to do his other things. He said okay, but I'm not sure we got through to him. He drew Henry at school. He drew Henry standing in our backyard, even though Henry had never been in our backyard. He drew an outline around Henry that was the shape of a person who was bigger than the deer, as if the person was made of mist or air. His teacher called my wife about these drawings, and my wife told her E had been at the grandfather's house and his grandfather did taxidermy, that we thought this was his way of processing it. The teacher bought that. I say bought, but really a lot of that is true. About 3 months after we got home, he said something weird, something that worried me. It came out of nowhere.
I think it would be nice not to have any insides, like Grandpa's deer, like Henry.
My wife and I both stopped eating. Buddy? I said. Why would you think that would be nice?
'Cause then you don't have to be scared of anything getting at your insides.
I gulped. E, nothing's gonna be getting at your insides, son.
I just think it would be nice, he smiled. I'm not saying I want it. I'm just saying it would be nice.
My wife asked him if anything was making him scared lately, and he said no. She asked if anything was making him think about these insides, and that was a no as well. He went back to his spaghetti, and he didn't bring it up again. Not that I know of. One evening I got home after 6. My wife had made meatloaf. The boys had already eaten. C was in his room with his books, and E had asked if he could play in the backyard for a while, before his bath. My wife told him yes. It was already dark by then, but our backyard was inside the porch light, and Eli was a kid who liked being outside. We'd been letting him have his half hour before bed since we got home. My wife called him in for his bath around 7:30, but he didn't come. She called again, then she went to the back door and called him from there. He still didn't come. Aggravated, I got up from the couch. I don't like it when the boys disobey their mother. I went to the back door. E was standing in the middle of the backyard with his back to me. He was facing the line of trees that separates our property from the property behind ours, and he wasn't moving. E, you okay, bud? Mom said to come inside.
Yeah, Dad,
he said without looking at me.
I'm coming.
But he didn't move. Right now, E, okay?
I'm coming,
he said. He stood there for another few seconds. Then he turned and walked toward me. He was a small shape inside the circle of the porch light. He came up the steps, and he looked up at me as he walked past into the kitchen.
Henry's home, he said.
What? I went out into the yard. I was flabbergasted. The deer was at the back edge of our lawn, where the grass ends and the tree line starts. It was facing the house. It was Henry, sure enough, just as I'd remembered him from Dad's house. And now his resin block at the hooves was anchored into our lawn, using the same rebar stakes that I'd seen at my dad's. I walked up to it, and I stood in front of it. This was brought here, and placed here. It was facing the back door of my house, and there was only one person that could do this. I walked around the side of the house. There was a mount in the side yard, too, between our house and the chain-link fence that separates our property from the neighbors. This one was a doe, also facing the house. Then I walked around to the front. Another one in the front yard near the mailbox, also facing the house, and another one at the corner of the lawn near the driveway, facing our house. I walked the entire perimeter. There were 6 in total, placed roughly evenly around our quarter-acre lot. 2 in back, 1 on each side, and 2 in the front. Every one of them was anchored in the lawn, with the same resin and the same stakes, all facing towards our home. I went back inside. My wife was at the sink rinsing E's spaghetti plate from earlier. He'd eaten after going back in. I must have been out there for about 20 minutes. Hey babe, are you okay? I think we need to take the boys upstairs, I told her. She looked at me with an eyebrow raised, but she didn't ask a question. She dried her hands in a hurry and went to the foot of the stairs, calling for C. C came down. She put her hand on his shoulder and steered him back up the stairs. Then she picked up E, who was sitting on the kitchen floor with one of his plastic horses, and carried him up after C. I went to the kitchen phone and called my dad. "Dad, what in the world?" I said as soon as I heard him pick up.
"What's wrong?"
"Your mounted deer appeared in my yard. Did you do this?" Immediately, he sounded very concerned.
"Son, I haven't moved any mounts off my property. Are they facing toward the road?"
No, Dad, they're facing toward the house." I could hear him swallow deeply from the other end of the phone.
"Listen to me very carefully. You need to turn those deer around. Right now, as fast as you can. Do you understand?"
"I hear you." I heard my wife make a sound at the top of the stairs. It wasn't a scream, but it was almost one. The boys were behind her. She pointed to the street. I looked outside. I could barely breathe. "Dad, there is no street. I'm looking out the window right now. There is no street anymore. No neighbor's house, nothing out there beyond the yard."
"Okay, I'm getting the truck right now. I'll be there in an hour. Do not go outside."
He hung up. Oh God, I thought. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time. My wife was at the top with E on her hip and C behind her. C had his hand on the back of her sweater. He wasn't looking at anything. His face looked like it had gone slack. I called them downstairs to the living room. They came. E was wriggling around and asking to be put down. He was saying he had to go back outside, saying he had to see Henry. My wife was holding him with both arms, saying no, he could not do that. We got them both to the living room couch. My wife sat down with them. E was crying and twisting, and C was sitting next to her, so motionless and emotionless. It was then that a long, low moaning sound came from outside, like a sick and dying cow. It came from somewhere out past the back of the house. It went on for about 5 seconds and stopped abruptly. A moment later, another moan came, this one out past the front of the house, deeper than before. A third one came after. None of them sounded like the same animal as the others. They all sounded different, like various animals in different stages of torment. C let go of his mother then. He slid sideways off the couch and onto the rug on the floor. I expected to see him catch himself, but his shoulder hit first and then his head, gently. His eyes were closed. "See?" I ran over to him and turned him over. He was breathing, thankfully, but his eyes remained closed. I shook his shoulder and said his name, but I could get no response from the boy. I then checked his pulse to be sure. It was fine. I picked him up and put him back on the couch beside his mother. She had E pinned to her with one arm. With the other, she held C's head against her shoulder. Then the house began to fill with mist. The mist was coming in from the bottom of the back door. I saw it from the living room through the doorway in the kitchen. It was thin. It curled up off the linoleum and crept across the kitchen floor toward us in a slow line. I went to the bathroom and got the bath mat. I rolled it and jammed it against the bottom of the back door. I then went to the front door and did the same with the rug from the entryway. The mist that was already inside did not retreat. It stayed where it was, low and slow, an inch off the floor. E had stopped crying. He was looking at the back door from his mother's lap. His face had a calmness to it, and I did not like that. "Mommy, Henry's at the back door," he said, oddly delighted. No, you stay right here with me, okay?" she told him. "He's at the back door waiting for me." She had to wrestle him a bit to keep him from going. "You're staying right here." "Mommy?" "No, stay." The moans were constant now. They were coming from every direction around the house and did not let up. There was always at least one of them going. Sometimes 2 of them overlapped. These random animalistic sounds. I went over to the front window. I saw it there, standing at the edge of our yard. It was the shape I'd seen at the edge of my father's trees, except now it had nothing to compare itself to. There was no forest out here. It was just a shape in the absence past where the yard ended. It was taller than the streetlights would be on a normal night. It was the height of the second story of a house. It was facing us. After a few seconds, it took a step. It came onto our lawn. I went to the side window in the dining room. There was a shape there too, at the side edge of the yard. It was stepping onto the lawn at the same time. I went to the back window. There was a shape at the back edge of the yard too. I don't know if it was the same shape in 3 places at once, or 3 different shapes. Don't know why I bothered. This thing made no sense. E was off his mother's lap suddenly, running across the kitchen toward the back door. "E!" He kept going. "E, stop!" I called to him. He had his hand on the doorknob, and he was turning it. I got to him in a heartbeat and pulled him off the door. The door came open about an inch as I pulled him off. Mist flooded in through that inch, and the second the door was open, this mist was so much thicker, and it brought with it a sort of smell, a smell like dead animal. I shut the door quickly and threw my weight against it. I got E under my left arm, and he was screaming and fighting me, screaming for Henry, saying over and over that Henry was at the door waiting, and we were being rude not to let him in. The figure at the front window was halfway across the front yard now. I could see it through the living room window from where I was holding the back door shut. It was walking at a steady and calm pace. No hurry, whatever it was. The mist was now up to my knees. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't know what to do. That was when the figure at the front of the house stopped, right at our front porch. It leaned over, and it put its face to the front window. I turned away. I did not want to look at that face. I had my back to the window, and I had E under my arm, the back door at my shoulders. I saw the bottom of the thing's figure framed in the front window when I looked. That had to be its legs. The legs were man-like, but stretched. The skin looked gray and wet, and the feet were bare and stretched too. I'm so glad I never saw that face. It continued to bend down, putting its face level with the window perfectly, and I kept looking at the floor. I heard it tap at the window then, so it had fingers, I assumed, but I did not look. The thing tapped 3 times. Was that its way of knocking? Another form was at the back door too. I could feel it through the door against my back, a pressure on the door. Light, but present. Not yet pushing. I doubted I could overpower something like that. The moaning was at a fever pitch. My wife was screaming, C was unconscious, E was screaming at me to let him go outside to Henry, and I think I was shouting, but I couldn't hear myself anymore. All at once, sunlight broke through the windows, and all the noises stopped. I looked up. I could see through the window and past the yard. No more void. It wasn't even night anymore. "What just happened?" my wife asked from the other room. I could barely answer. I don't know." We stayed where we were for several minutes. There was no telling what was going on. Was it getting better? Getting worse? Was it a trick? I carried E to the couch and laid him next to his mother. He wasn't frantic anymore all of a sudden. Whatever had possessed him was gone, and he looked confused, even scared. I went to the front door then. I pulled the rug away from the bottom of the door, and I opened it. There I saw my dad's truck in the driveway. It was parked at a weird angle, as if he had stopped in a hurry. The front tire was up on the lawn, the driver's side door standing open still. I could see from there even the keys were in the ignition, and the dome light was on, dim in the morning sun. In the passenger seat was his John Deere hat. Henry, the deer, was beside the truck. Henry was now facing the other way, facing out toward the street. The resin block at his feet had been pulled out of the ground and reset. The grass around the block was disturbed and torn. Whoever had done it in a hurry. I walked around the house. The other 5 mounts were still facing the house, still facing us. It was only Henry that had been turned. Henry, who was by my father's abandoned truck. I could breathe again. The street was back, the neighbors' houses were back, the sun was here. The only thing that wasn't here and back to normal was my dad. The police were called, and I called my mother, pleading that he was somehow there, that maybe his truck had made it here on its own accord. But no, He had done what he said he would do. She said that he had driven down in the night. She knew that we were in danger, but she didn't know the exact situation. And I told her the truth. That his truck was here, but he was not. Before the police arrived, I went back outside and pulled the rebar stakes out of every resin block, dragging those 6 mounts into the garage, one at a time. I put them under tarps in the back. When the police arrived, it was something that I did not want to talk about or explain. I went back out then and stamped the displaced ground flat with my boot. Then I went back in, and I sat with my family until the officer arrived. We could not speak of the events, obviously, but we told him that Dad had driven down here, and yet we couldn't find him. The officer asked about any memory issues, how mentally aged he was. But I told him the truth. My dad was healthy, stable. The officer went out to the truck then and examined it for a while. The authorities searched for my dad. Dogs and people of all sorts scoured the surrounding blocks and my yard. Divers in the nearby creek searched too. Apparently, state troopers went to my mom's house and searched all around there too. For a while, his picture was in the news, but he was never found. Not even a body. The only traces were by where Henry stood. Desperate, pushed-in footsteps, like a man trying to pry and turn a statue. Not long after this, my mother moved into an assisted living place in town. She didn't want to be in the house anymore, and she didn't like being alone. We had a memorial for my dad about a year after he was officially declared missing. The best we could do was bury an empty box in the cemetery beside his parents. The county sheriff came to the service, standing at the back of the chapel, but he didn't say a word to me afterward. Mom went on for another 2 years in that assisted living place, but she would die of a stroke. She had been sharp up to the day she went, and we talked on the phone every week. The topic of Dad and those deers was very clearly avoided. The one time the conversation veered was about a month before she died. I went to visit her in person, and out of nowhere she said, "You know, your father did what he had to do." I know, Mom. He was a very tired man. All the things he had to do at our house, he didn't want to do any of it. But he did it for us, because he had to. That's the type of man he always was. Did what he had to do. I bet you if you were here, he would do it again in a heartbeat. I hugged my mother tightly, and I tried not to sound like I was crying, despite the tears. Mom never mentioned what happened to the deer in the yard. The last time I went to their house after Mom passed to check out the property and her belongings, the deer were gone, and at every spot they had been standing, there wasn't even a mark in the ground. I hope whenever the worst happens, if it happens, I can be that kind of dad, ready to lay down my life, meet my fate for the sake of my children and family. This was a terrifying story, leaving a lot of questions to be answered. But at least there's some light knowing that true good exists. Good night. This has been Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails, and you can send me your true stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org. Support what I do and unlock tons of extra narrations and stories read by me. Head over to Eerie.fm, that's EERIE.fm, and become a premium member. We can't keep going depending on platforms like YouTube, who might pay us 1 month, then not the next. So we need your help. We need as many people as possible to become premium members, so that we can be independent and create even more amazingly terrifying content for you. Plus, you get a ton of bonus goodies and more new bonuses every week for members only. Head to Eerie.fm. You can go there for free too, and enjoy every EerieCast show in one spot. Thank you. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. Okay, so I wasn't planning on releasing this episode on YouTube, because YouTube doesn't like these kinds of, episodes. But it's been very well received by premium members, and on the podcast side of things. So here it is, and viewer discretion is heavily advised. We need your help to keep Tales from the Break Room and all of EerieCast alive. Go to Eerie.fm, that's EERIE.fm, and sign up to be a premium member. As a member, you'll never have to listen to another ad on any EerieCast show. You'll unlock dozens of hours of exclusive audiobooks, including one narrated by me. You'll get exclusive shows and bonus stories you can't hear anywhere else, and more. Only $8 a month, or $70 a year. That's all we need to keep the horror alive. Thank you. That's Eerie.fm.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
I need to be clear with you about the following story. This is not your usual scary story. This one is well written, darkly realistic, and very, very devastating. If you have trouble dealing with subject matter regarding harm against kids, then this one might not be for you. It's not graphic at all, my stories never really are, but this one will make you feel dirty, and it will leave you wanting to cry. The story is titled, Everything I Never Knew, from E.J. Walkins. My sister disappeared from a dairy plant in October of 2003, when I was 9 years old. The county still has the case open. Her name was Delilah. She was 8, almost 9 years old, and I was a year older. She had a stuffed daughter named Bean that came with her everywhere, and a small white scar on her chin from a porch step she'd fallen off of when she was 4. There was this thing she did where she would go really still right before she cried, like she was holding a breath she knew would set her off if she let it out. I remember the day it happened. My mom had flown to Ohio because her mother had died, and the funeral was Saturday afternoon. Dad was supposed to take care of us for the weekend. He was foreman of the cheese line at the dairy plant and had been there 12 years by then. Most days he left before we were awake. The phone in the kitchen rang at 5:08 that morning. I was already awake by then. Delilah had crawled into my bed sometime in the night with Bean tucked under her arm, and I'd been lying there pretending to sleep, so I wouldn't have to roll over and give her more room. I heard Dad answer in the kitchen, mumbling something into the receiver. Then he walked into the hallway. After a minute, he said, "No, I'll come," twice in the same low voice. He came into my room a few minutes later, in his jeans and a flannel shirt. He stood in the doorway for a long second, looking at the two of us in bed. I had my eyes just barely open, so he couldn't tell I was awake, but I could see him there. When he turned on the lamp, Delilah blinked and made a small sound, pulling Bean closer. "Kids. Hey, Eli, wake up, bud." I opened my eyes and pretended I was just waking up. "Something's going on at work. I've got to go in for an hour, maybe 2. Gonna take you guys with me."
"Why can't we stay here?"
"I tried Mrs. Adler, she's not picking up, and I'm not leaving you two alone here." Delilah sat up and pushed her hair off her face. She told him her stomach hurt. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his hand to her forehead. Whatever he was feeling for, he didn't find it. "You're not warm. You probably need to eat something. Come on."
"I don't want to go."
"Deli, it's gonna be 1 hour. You can watch cartoons. Nobody's there. I have to check on a tank, and I have to do it now." She looked at me. I shrugged. I was 9, and to me the dairy plant was interesting. We'd only been there once before, and I'd liked it. She held Bean close and got out of the bed, walking down the hall to her room without another word. In the kitchen, Dad poured cereal into 2 bowls and set them on the counter without milk. He was wearing his work boots by then, untied, so the laces ticked on the linoleum when he moved. Delilah came back in a sweatshirt over her pajamas, holding Bean by 1 foot. She climbed onto a stool, ate maybe 4 bites, and pushed the bowl away.
"My stomach hurts."
"You'll feel better when we get there. I'll bring you crackers," my dad said. He was on the phone, and he wasn't really looking at her when he said it, though. The drive was 26 minutes. The fields outside were silver with frost, and the sky was a deep before-dawn navy. Delilah was in the back seat with Bean on her lap and her cheek against the window.
Daddy?
Yeah, honey.
I don't want to go in.
Deli, we talked about this.
My stomach hurts so bad.
You can lay down on the couch in the break room. I'll bring you some ginger ale. She watched the field instead of answering. The plant was on a county road off Route 30, all the way behind a chain-link fence and a sliding gate. Dad had a key for the pedestrian gate and a different one for the side door near the loading dock. The main building was long and low, with the words Hagner Valley Dairy stenciled in faded green above the loading bay. No other cars were in the employee lot. He pulled around to a spot by the side door and killed the engine. The silence that came after made me realize how loud the heater had been. I undid my seatbelt. Delilah stayed put. Deli?
I don't want to go in.
Delilah Marie, come on, honey.
He's in there.
I remember that moment. I recall thinking I didn't know what she meant at the time, and I didn't ask. Dad sighed and twisted around in his seat to face her. Who's in there, baby?
The Shadow Man.
He looked at me, and once more I shrugged. I didn't know what to do with that information either. He turned back to her, and his voice softened. Del, there's nobody in there. I checked the cameras before we left the house. Just me, you, and Eli. I promise. I could tell she was trying not to cry. I told her it was fine. Bean came inside with us. The side door opened into a vestibule with a shoe-cleaning grate and a wall of clipboards. Dad punched a code into the inner door and held it open for us. The hallway beyond had the smell I remembered from a Christmas open house we'd been to when I was 6. It's hard to describe if you've never been to the dairy plant. Kind of like bleach, I guess, with that undertone of milk. He walked us down to the break room and turned on the lights as he went. Those fluorescent tube lights woke up 2 at a time, with soft electric popping sounds. The break room had a folding table, a microwave, a vending machine, and a small TV bolted to a high shelf in the corner. The couch against the wall had clearly been somebody's living room couch before it got donated to work. Dad turned the TV on, flipping through to Cartoon Network, and handed me the remote. Right, so the phone here goes to my office, numbers taped on the wall right there. If you guys need me, you pick it up and dial that. Don't go anywhere. Delilah, are you listening?
Yeah.
You stay in this room. Don't touch the microwave or open the back door, and don't go anywhere near the production area. I'll be back in an hour, maybe a little more.
Okay.
Eli, watch your sister, you hear me?
I hear you, Dad.
He looked at her one more time. She was sitting on the couch with Bean on her lap and her shoes still on. He started to say something else, then he changed his mind, and he kissed the top of her head, telling her he loved her and that he'd be back soon. The sound of his boots faded as he went down the hallway. After that, I could only hear the TV and some refrigerator in the distance. Somewhere deeper in the building, a steady sort of pulse. Delilah scooted closer to me on the couch. She'd pulled Bean up against her chest with both hands tight around him. We sat there. The cartoons played. Eventually, the clock on the wall said it had only been 35 minutes. I'd lost interest in the show somewhere around the second commercial break. Delilah hadn't moved from her spot, and Bean had taken up his position against her sternum. I'm gonna go look around.
Eli?
I'm just gonna go look. Dad's not gonna care. We came here that one time and he showed us the tanks, remember?
But he said don't leave.
He said don't go to the production area. The break room is right by the offices. I'll just look at the offices. She didn't say anything after that. I stood up. The TV was loud now that I was paying attention to how loud it was. I told her I'd be 10 minutes. She went still again, meaning she was about to cry, so I sat back down.
Okay, I won't go without you. Come with me.
I don't wanna. Deli, there's nobody here, Dad said. He said he looked at the cameras. She kept her face turned to the TV. What did you mean by Shadow Man? She looked at me sideways without turning her head.
He's here. He stays in the corners. I don't see anything. He doesn't want you to see him.
Bean was getting squeezed so tight, his head was at an angle. She's 8 years old, I thought. She's making it up because she's scared and doesn't want to be here. You said you've seen him before? Where?
The other time we came, he was up on the walkway.
You didn't say anything then.
I told Mommy.
What did Mom say?
She said it was a regular man.
That seemed strange. I think now my mother probably said something else, and Delilah translated it through her own head. But at the time, her response sat in my chest and didn't move from there. I told her I wouldn't leave her, and she could come with me, and if she saw him, she could tell me and we'd come right back. She thought about it. Then she got off the couch and put her hand in my hand. Bean came along by his foot. The hallway outside the break room ran in two directions. To the left was the way Dad had brought us in. To the right was a long beige corridor with linoleum tile and a strip of black rubber baseboard, lit by the overhead lights that Dad had switched on as he walked us down it. None of the doors had names on them, just laminated sheets and plastic frames with what looked like codes written on them. 2 doors I tried were locked. The third was a supply closet that smelled like bleach. Delilah pulled at my hand and I closed it. The corridor opened on the right into a wider space that I now know was the shipping office. There were 2 desks with old desktop computers and a corkboard layered with paper schedules. Somebody's mug was on one of the desks with a brown ring inside it from old coffee. The mug had a cartoon cow on it, and it said, "Got milk?" We went on. The corridor T-intersected at the end. The left end had a heavier door with a small wire glass window and a hand-lettered sign that said, "Production, keep closed." The handle there didn't turn. I went back to the T and turned right. Delilah came with me, but slower now, looking back the way we'd come. I had to tug her hand a little to keep her with me. At the end of that hallway was a stairwell with a yellow railing and a doorway that opened onto a metal catwalk. The catwalk ran out over the production floor, 10 feet up, and from the top of the stairs, you could see the whole room through it. Stainless steel tanks tall enough to take up 2 stories, with pipes connecting them and small valve handles painted red and blue. Below the tanks, the floor was open to drains and washed in pale gray light from the high windows. This was the part I'd liked the first time we'd come. I let go of her hand without thinking and walked out onto the catwalk to look down. The grating made a different sound than the linoleum had under my shoes. Behind me, I heard her say my name.
Eli?
Look, it's huge.
Eli, come back.
I turned. She was at the doorway with both hands on the frame, not stepping out onto the catwalk.
It's safe. There's a railing here. I want to go back.
1 second. I leaned my forehead on the rail and looked straight down. The hum I'd been hearing in the break room was louder out here, low and steady, and I could feel it in the metal under my hands. When I turned back toward her, her face was pointed up and to the right, past me, at the far end of the catwalk, where it disappeared around the side of a tank. Her mouth was open. She was doing the still thing again. I looked where she was looking. The catwalk turned out of sight behind the tank, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary.
What is it?
She didn't answer me. I walked back to her and took her hand again, and her hand was cold.
Deli, what did you see? He's down there now.
I told her there was nobody, and I pulled her back through the doorway into the stairwell. We came out at the bottom into a corridor I hadn't seen on our first visit. The walls were 2 big stainless tanks set side by side, with a 5-foot gap between them. The gap ran maybe 60 feet and ended at another door. The tank walls were polished bright enough that you could see your own outline in them, blurred and stretched in the curve of the steel. Delilah stopped at the entrance.
I don't want to go that way.
It's just a hallway, I replied.
He's at the end of it.
There's nobody at the end. Look, I'll show you. I walked into the gap. The reflections of me on either side walked with me, 2 pale ghosts at my elbows, faces smeared. I could see Delilah behind me in the curve of the steel, hand still on the doorframe with Bean dangling. As I went farther down, she got smaller. The humming sound was stronger here, with a higher note in it under the bass. I got to the door at the end, and I tried the handle. It was locked. I turned around to walk back. The reflections walked with me again, and that was when I saw that one of those reflections was not mine. It was farther down the curve of the left-hand tank, behind my reflection, taller than my reflection, and it was a person shape that was the wrong proportions, narrow at the shoulders and long down the middle, blurred along edges that didn't match the edges on me. I stopped walking. The reflection stopped walking. I blinked hard. When I opened my eyes, the reflection was just my reflection, and Delilah's small reflection at the doorway behind me. Beyond that, just the curve of the tank. I made myself walk back at a normal speed. When I got to her, she was looking at me with the same face she had whenever Mom was about to tell us something serious.
You saw?
I didn't see anything, I told you. There's nobody there.
You saw.
Deli, I didn't. Come on. She put a small hand on my shirt, on my chest, and she said,
Please don't leave me here.
I won't. We walked back to the break room together without going by the shipping office or the stairwell. She climbed onto the couch and pulled her knees up, holding Bean to her face. The TV was still on. Cartoons had moved to a different show. I sat next to her. After what I saw with the reflections, my heart had sped up a bit. The clock on the wall said 7:42 when we sat down. The next time I looked up, 8:11. Del, I'm thirsty.
There's water.
I want a Capri Sun. Dad said there was a vending machine in the office hallway.
I don't want to go.
You can stay. I'll go and come back real quick. I won't go anywhere else.
You said you wouldn't leave me.
I'm not leaving. I'm just going to the vending machine. It's right there. She went quiet. Then she lay down on the couch and turned her face into the back cushion. Bean was tucked between her chin and her chest. I told her I'd bring her one too, but she didn't say anything. The vending machine took dollar bills and quarters. I'd brought 4 quarters from the cup of change on Dad's dresser. It didn't have Capri Sun, but it did have bug juice, so I bought one for me and one for Delilah. I carried them under my arm. Dad's office was at the other end of the hallway. I told myself I would just look inside real quick and see if he was there. I wanted to ask if we could go home already. I didn't say to myself the second part, which was that I wanted to tell him that Delilah was still talking about the Shadow Man. But his office was empty. The light was on, which I thought was weird. His coat was over the back of the chair. There was a clipboard on the desk and a coffee cup next to it, and the coffee cup was empty. The chair was pushed out from the desk like he had just stood up. I called for him quietly, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to be heard for some reason. I didn't get an answer. I walked back down the office hallway toward the break room with the 2 bug juices under my arm. It must have been 10 minutes, maybe 12 at most. I was 9 years old and wasn't wearing a watch at the time. When I got to the break room, the TV was on, but the couch was empty, except for Bean. Bean was still on the couch. Delilah's juice box from breakfast was tipped onto its side on the table. A small amount of apple juice had run out onto the laminate. The straw was still in it. I called her name.
Delilah?
Nothing. I said it again louder. The bathroom in the corner of the break room was empty. I called into the office hallway, then up the stairwell, where the catwalk doorway echoed her name back at me.
Delilah!
I then tried the production door, but the handle didn't turn. I went down a hallway I hadn't been down with her, past doors that said Cold Storage 2 or 3, through a heavy plastic flap curtain that closed behind me with a soft slap. The room past the flap was warmer than the rest of the building. There were tanks in there too, but smaller ones, and a workbench with a panel of gauges and a wrench laying on top of an open clipboard.
Delilah?
Eli? His voice came from a doorway at the back of the room. I went to it. The doorway opened onto a smaller space with a single tank in it, a white tiled wall and a grated drain in the floor. Dad was standing at a utility sink at the far wall, with his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, drying his forearms with a blue paper towel. Water was beaded on the front of his shirt, where his apron had been. The apron was on a hook by the door. Eli, what are you doing back here? You shouldn't be in this room."
Delilah's gone.
"What?"
She's not in the break room. She's gone.
He stopped drying his hands. The paper towel was in a wad in his fist. He looked at me, and I had never seen his face do what it did then. It was like watching a man who had been wearing a costume realize that his costume was on backwards. He dropped the paper towel on the floor. "What do you mean she's gone?"
I went to the vending machine and I came back and she wasn't there.
"How long ago, Eli?"
I don't know.
"Eli, how long?"
I don't know, Dad. 10 minutes, maybe more.
He pushed past me through the flap curtain. I followed him. We searched the plant for an hour. Then we called 911. By the time the first deputy arrived, I had told my dad 3 more times where I'd been, how long I'd been gone, and each time he asked me for a number of minutes, I gave him a different answer, because I was a kid, and I was panicked. He kept his voice level, never really raising it. The deputies cleared the building. Then a county sergeant came in, along with a search and rescue unit with 2 dogs. Somebody got a hold of my mother in Ohio. By the time she made it home, it was after dark, and there were 6 cruisers in the dairy parking lot and a news van out at the gate. The side door near the loading dock had been propped open with a folded square of cardboard. Nobody could say when. Dad said he had brought us through that door, but he had let it close behind us. The deputies took photos of that cardboard. The dogs went out across the field behind the plant, but lost track of anything at the ditch. The county's theory after the first week was that a stranger had abducted her. Someone who had known the plant was empty on Saturdays, and yet knew we would be there. Sometime in the next year, it became an abduction by someone who had been watching the family for a while. And after that, it stopped being any specific theory, and just became the case file with my sister's name on it, and her 2nd grade school photo paper-clipped to the inside. A woman from the FBI asked me to draw the plant on a piece of printer paper. I drew her the catwalk and the corridor between the 2 tanks, and the room in the back where I'd found my dad. I told her about the shape and the reflection, and she wrote it down. Our living room at that point smelled permanently like casseroles, from all the people we didn't know sending them to us for support. My mother sat at the kitchen table at 3 a.m. with all the lights off. Bean was on the kitchen counter in a clear plastic evidence bag. 3 days after, in the same flannel he had worn that morning, my dad sat in the front yard at sundown until it was fully dark. My mother got the diagnosis when I was 17. She lived another 19 months. By the end, she could not say Delilah's name anymore without coming apart, so she found ways to talk around it, and we all learned to use the same language. My father stopped saying it earlier than that, sometime that first year. I don't remember him saying her name again. I grew up. I went to college in state and moved out for good after my mother's funeral. I got a job in HVAC. I called my dad on Sundays, but we never talked about much. The thing that started it was a planner. 2 summers ago, my dad sold the house I grew up in, moving into a smaller place on the other side of the county. The basement had been a slow accumulation of everything none of us had been able to throw away after my mother died. He needed some help clearing it out, and I was the only one left to help him. He took the garage and I took the basement. He said he couldn't go down there for more than 10 minutes at a time without his back giving out. The basement had been my mother's territory. Her sewing machine and boxes of fabric were down there, along with plastic bins of Christmas ornaments she'd labeled in her famously round handwriting on masking tape strips that had yellowed and curled at the edges. I was going through a stack of bins along the south wall when I found the box of her planners. She had used the same brand of black hardcover daily planner from the year she got married until the year she got sick. There were 23 of them, banded together in 5s with rubber bands that broke when I touched them. I sat on the basement floor and went through them one at a time. I couldn't help it. Most of the entries were grocery lists, dentist appointments, or my soccer schedule, or Delilah's piano lessons. I found the 2003 planner near the bottom of the stack. I almost didn't open it. I sat with it on my lap for a while. When I finally did open it, I went straight to October. Then I made myself close it and started January instead. I read from there. I thought if I went straight to the month it happened, I would skip past whatever else was in there, and I didn't want to do that, even though it was a bit tempting. But I found something on a Wednesday in mid-September, 2.5 weeks before that day. The entry was 3 lines. Most of it was about a plumber. But the line in the middle said, "Mr. A called from school today regarding D. Talk to John tonight." The D had been written first, then a name on top of it that had been started and crossed out before I could read it. The exclamation marks were my mother's. She underlined the "tonight" twice. Upstairs, I could hear my dad walking from the kitchen to the garage. He had developed a slow shuffle over the last few years. I knew Mr. A. His name was David Allen. He had been the school counselor at the elementary school I went to from kindergarten through 5th grade, the same school Delilah went to from kindergarten through 2nd. I had seen him once in 4th grade, after a kid in my class had said something about my sister, and I broke the kid's tooth. Mr. Allen had been a soft-spoken man with a beard. I remembered him saying that what had happened to my family was not my fault, and I'd nodded and said, "Yes, sir," and the meeting ended. I closed the planner, and I put it back in the bin. Then I put that bin in the pile of things to keep. I didn't say anything to my dad about it that day or the next. I drove home that night with the planner in the passenger seat under a folded sweatshirt, and honestly, I wasn't sure why I took it. A couple days later, I called the elementary school. Crazy, but the receptionist actually remembered me, which I had not been counting on. She said Mr. Allen had retired in 2015, but she could get me his email. I said thanks. I wrote him a short message that night and left it open on my laptop for 2 days before finally sending it. I told him I was Delilah's brother, that I was trying to fill in some things from back then, and I was wondering if he would be willing to talk to me. He wrote back the next morning, saying yes. He asked if I would come to his house. He couldn't drive at night anymore. His house was a brick rancher with a wheelchair ramp by the front door. He met me in the doorway. He had me sit at his kitchen table and made coffee, and he waited to ask me any questions until after the coffee was poured. Mr. Allen," I said. "David," he corrected me. David, I found something in my mom's planner. It says you called her about Delilah 3 weeks before she went missing." He sat across from me with both hands around his mug. "I remember the call," he said. "Can you tell me what it was about?" "I was a counselor for 31 years, and I had 2 cases I've not been able to make peace with. Your sister's was the first. I called your mother because Delilah's teacher had come to me with a concern. Your sister had drawn this picture of her family during a quiet activity. There were things in the picture that were, well, unusual. I'll leave it at that. I called your mother and told her I'd like to set up a meeting with both of your parents. She was very upset on the phone. She asked me not to call your father. She said she would talk to him herself, and she would call me back the next day." "Did she ever call you back?" "She left me a voicemail at the school 3 days later. She said she had spoken to your father, and that picture had been a misunderstanding. She said there was a relative in the family who had had problems with alcohol, and that Delilah had been around it. She thanked me and asked not to follow up." "What happened after?" "Well, I waited a week. I went to Delilah's classroom on a Friday and spent 15 minutes drawing with her at her desk, while the rest of the class did silent reading. I asked her if she was happy at home. She said yes. I asked if anything was scaring her, and she said yes. She said a man was in the corner sometimes. I thought she was describing an imaginary friend. I asked her if it was a real man, and she said no. I thought about it through the weekend, and on Monday morning I picked up the phone to call your mother again. That was the morning I heard about the dairy plant." "Eli, I want to say one more thing. I've run that conversation with your mother through my head every week for 21 years. I should have called your father. I should have called CPS. I did neither. I told myself at the time that there was a process and that nobody had told me anything that crossed the threshold for a report.
That was true. It was also a way of letting myself off the hook. I'm old enough now to know the difference, and I wanted you to hear me say it. I stayed and talked for another 15 minutes, but nothing really was said. I mean, nothing more important than what was already said. Before I left, he said that he was sorry. I believed him, but I didn't have anything against him. A friend of mine from college works at a regional engineering firm that does plant maintenance contracts for several of the dairies in the state. His father had worked in the plant when my dad did. I decided to call him up on a Thursday, asking him a favor I knew he probably couldn't do. I asked if he could pull the maintenance logs from the plant for the week when that event happened. I told him why. He called me back the next Tuesday. I was expecting him to tell me that he wasn't able to do it. We met up for a beer on Wednesday at a place near his office, and he had a manila folder. This is from a backup the new owners imported when they bought the assets. It's not a chain of custody document. You can't take it to anybody, okay? I know. Thank you, man, thank you. I'm only giving it to you because I think it's the right thing to do. I'm not gonna make you regret it, I swear. He slid the folder across the table. It had 18 pages in it, most of them unremarkable cleaning logs and vendor visits. I went through them at the bar with him sitting across from me. He watched me while I read. The Friday night entry was on page 11, the day before my sister's disappearance. The badge log showed my father had clocked in at 9:47 p.m. and clocked out at 2:13 a.m., about 4.5 hours. The work order line said, concrete patch, basement utility room, facility maintenance, JFK. JFK was my father's initials. Yes, like the president. My friend pointed out two problems with that line. The badge log showed only my father's entry for the whole night, with no companion work order, and patches like that were nearly always two-person jobs. The dairy plant didn't have a basement utility room. He had pulled the floor plan to check, just in case. There was a utility crawl space under the production wing, accessible by a hatch in the washdown area. But it wasn't called a utility room, and it wasn't somewhere you would patch concrete on a Friday night. The Saturday entry was on page 15. The badge log showed my father in at 5:46 a.m. and out at 7:11 p.m. The work order line said facility check, tank 3 cold storage, JFK. The line below it said, no service ticket generated, see facility log. That facility log was page 16. There was no entry for that morning. The page jumped from Friday's evening shift to Sunday morning's incoming run. My friend watched me close the folder. Eli? I know. As I said, you can't take this to anyone. Not even the cops with this paperwork. You understand that? Yeah, I understand. I left after thanking him again, and without touching my beer. That fall, my dad and I went out for dinner a few times. The first time was at his place. He made some spaghetti, which is what he made almost every time we ate at his place. We talked about the Steelers and a leak he had in his bathroom ceiling. He hugged me longer than usual at the door. I could tell he was starting to feel lonely. The second time we went out that fall was at a chain restaurant on the highway. He had a beer with his meal and made a joke about getting old. He told me a story I'd heard before, about a coworker who had dropped a wrench into a tank during a cleaning cycle and had to fish it out on a wire hanger. He laughed at the part where the coworker swore in front of the plant manager. I laughed too, like I always did. Then I asked him about the fall. That fall. I tried to make it sound natural in the conversation. I said I'd been doing some thinking lately, trying to put pieces together for myself. I wanted to ask him a few things if he didn't mind. He set his beer down and looked at me. I couldn't tell what that look even meant. What do you want to know? That Friday night, you were at the plant late. How do you know that? I was looking through Mom's planner. She didn't keep track of when I was at work, Eli. It was something else. It doesn't matter. I just remembered. He tinkered with his spaghetti with his fork. I worked late a lot. You know that. I do know that. Do you have something to ask me, son? Did something happen that week? What do you mean, did something happen that week?
I don't know. I'm just asking. Eli, I don't know why we're talking about this. He drank his beer and began to watch the TV over the bar. I changed the subject. He paid for dinner and walked me to my car, hugging me and telling me to drive safe. The third dinner was back at his place 2 weeks later. Spaghetti, of course, and we didn't talk about any of it. He fell asleep in his recliner during a college football game. I sat there and watched him sleep before I went home. There was one more thing I did. Delilah had a friend in 2nd grade named Amber Peltier, the only real friend I remember her having outside our family. After the Saturday, her parents pulled her out of the school. We never saw her again. I found her on Facebook. Her last name was different now, and she was a teacher at an elementary school 2 counties over. Her profile picture was her with 2 kids on her lap on a porch. I sent her a message telling her who I was, asking if she'd be able to talk to me. She wrote back within an hour. She asked if I could come to her house that weekend. I brought some sunflowers. She met me at the door and put them in a vase at the kitchen sink, while her husband took the kids to the park to give us the house. We sat in her living room. There was a candle burning on the coffee table that smelled like apples. You know, I've been wanting to talk to somebody about this for 2 decades. I've never really known who to talk to, so I'm glad you're here, she explained. I'd say it's good to be here, if you know what I mean, but thank you for having me. She told me, I want you to understand that I'm telling you what an 8-year-old told me when I was 8, okay? I don't know what's true versus what she made up to deal with something else. I'm just gonna tell you what she told me. I nodded. We had a sleepover, just the one time. I don't know if you remember that, but we were playing Truth or Dare together in my room. She took every dare instead of a single truth. But you know kids that age, especially the anxious ones. Dares are scary, so it's always truth this and truth that. But not her. So I dared her to tell me a truth. And she started to cry. I thought I'd done something wrong, that I said something I shouldn't have. I remember that night, I replied. She was so scared yet excited to have her first real sleepover. It was a quiet night back at home for me. I recall feeling proud of her for being brave about it. But yeah, that sounds like Deli. She had always been very difficult about opening up. Did she say anything afterward? Amber herself looked like she might cry. She cleared her throat then and said, I'm so sorry, Eli. I'm telling you this because you need to hear it. So please don't think that I'm trying to start a family feud or hurt you. This is something I never even told the cops. God, I'm so sorry. I swallowed. It's okay. Please tell me. Your sister, Delilah, she said that every time she was around her father, her stomach would start to hurt, and that she never knew why. I asked her if he had ever hurt her, and she said that her father was the nicest man but could be scary. He watched her from corners, she said, and sometimes he would follow her to her room when no one else was around. When I asked why he would do that, she cried so hard she couldn't speak. I held her and rocked her and got her to calm down, but I did everything I could to keep the topic away from her home and her father for the rest of the night. My eyes filled with water, and I held both hands cupped in front of my mouth, elbows on my knees. I didn't know I'd been staring at the floor the entire time until I finally blinked, causing some tears to come loose. I wiped my face and stuttered. Thank you, Amber. I need to go. I'm so sorry, Eli. I should have told someone. I was so young and scared, and I didn't know what any of it meant at the time. I walked out, and I just drove. Around the start of November, I went out to the plant for the first time in 21 years. I didn't go in. I sat in my car across from the chain-link fence and just looked at that building. The plant had closed back in 2019 when Hagner Valley sold to a national co-op that consolidated the operation into a larger facility 40 miles away. The Hagner Valley Dairy stencil had faded to where you couldn't read it anymore, but I knew it was there. The lot had weeds in the cracks of the asphalt and a for sale sign by the gate. I must have sat there for nearly an hour. The light was going. A second-floor window at the south end of the building was a weak yellow square, and I hoped it was just the setting sun catching the glass at an angle. When I drove past it the second time on my way home, the light was gone, and I made myself stop trying to figure out whether it had been anything. I called the listing agent 2 days later. His name was Brian Conroy, and I'd apparently played intramural soccer with him in college. Truth be told, I didn't remember him. I told him I was thinking about getting into commercial real estate as a hobby, and I wanted to walk a vacant industrial property to learn what to look for. He laughed and said the dairy was a perfect place to learn because every system in it was 40 years old. He said he would meet me there one day. But instead I asked if I could just take the keys for an afternoon and bring them back. I could hear him shaking his head over the phone. He said he wasn't supposed to do that. I explained my situation as best I could, that I really wanted to get a feel of the place by myself, that whenever people showed me properties, I never got the right feel, that it felt like I was being rushed or pressured, and I always walked away feeling like I never really saw everything I wanted to see. I played up the I've got money now angle, and eventually he relented. He said that he trusted me, having known me back in college, which is miraculous considering, again, I didn't remember him. Beyond his name, I mean. He said he would leave the keys in a lockbox on the gate, and he would text me the code, and he would have to change it the next morning. But he said don't get hurt, and don't let anyone see me go in. I thanked him profusely. The day before I went, I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment and drank a beer. I looked at the code that Brian had texted me for the lockbox, like I was afraid I would forget it or accidentally delete it. Around 11, I decided to call my dad. He picked up on the second ring.
Hey, son.
Hey, Dad. Just checking in.
You alright? You sound stressed.
Yeah, it's been a long week for me. How's your back?
Same as it's been. You sound tired.
I am tired.
Then get some sleep.
We were quiet for a few seconds, and eventually I said, Dad?
Yeah, son.
Nothing. I love you, Dad.
Love you too, son.
I hung up, and I made myself go to bed. I drove out there a little past noon. The sky was gray, but the forecast did not call for any rain or sun, just gray. The county road was empty. I parked on the shoulder again across from the gate, and I walked over to the Dropbox. I typed the code, scared it wouldn't work. But it opened on the first try. The 3 keys on a brass ring inside had handwritten labels that read, Side, Office, General. The gate squealed when I pushed it. The chain had been wound through a fence post instead of the gate itself, which meant the gate had been swinging on its hinges for God knows how long. I walked the lot to the side door by the loading dock. The lock turned slowly, and I pushed the door open, standing in the vestibule with the cold air from inside meeting me at the chest. The smell when I went in was nothing like I remembered. That bleachiness was gone, and the milk ghost under it was gone too. What was there instead was the smell of old building that had not been heated in 5 winters at least. It had the stench of cold concrete and dust, a thread of mildew there too, so moisture was probably getting in somewhere. I propped the side door open behind me with a folded square of cardboard. The office hallway looked the same, but the fluorescent tubes were now gone from half the fixtures, and the plastic frames on the doors were empty where the laminated codes had been. The shipping office had been stripped except for the built-in desks. The mug with the cartoon cow was not on the desk anymore, but it was a mug, so I'm not really sure what I was expecting. I went down to the break room, my stomach getting heavy and painful. In the break room, the bracket where the TV had been was still on the wall, but everything else had been hauled out. The folding table had been left behind, leaned against the back wall with its legs folded. I stood in the doorway, but I did not go in. I'd been in this room enough. I went on. The corridor that had T intersected at the production door was the same corridor. The "Production Keep Closed" sign had been pulled down at some point, leaving a ghost in the paint where it had been taped. The vestibule beyond the door was empty. The stainless wall the washdown station had been mounted to had been pulled off, and the bracket holes were ringed with black where the silicone caulk had stained the surrounding metal. I walked through into the production room. I had to stop, because the room was not the room I'd walked into when I was 9. The tanks were gone, all of them. The catwalk was still up there, 10 feet over the floor, but it ran across an empty space now. Where the tanks had stood, there were rings of bolts set into the concrete and a few feet of pipe stub poking up where the cold lines had been cut. The drains were still in the floor, but the hum I'd felt under my hands on the catwalk railing was gone. I stood in the middle of the empty room. I'd been carrying that room around in my head for 2/3 of my life, and somebody had come through 5 years ago, unbolting it, selling it for scrap. The corridor I'd walked down between the two tanks, the one with the reflections, was gone. Where it had been, there was just floor. I made myself keep moving. The office key opened my father's old office. The door was no longer locked, but the key worked, which surprised me a little. The office had been emptied like the rest of the building. The desk was still there. After all, it had been built into the wall, a slab of laminate over a frame of 2x4s. The drawers were still in the desk. There were 3 on the right side, stacked. I sat in the empty office for a minute. Then I started with the top drawer. The top drawer was empty. The middle drawer was empty except for a single rubber band and a paperclip. The bottom drawer was the deepest of the 3, and it was empty too. But I'd read enough crime novels and watched enough movies in my life to know what to do with an empty, deep drawer. I pulled it out of the desk frame and turned it over. When I saw it, I couldn't breathe. You have to understand that I did not expect to find anything right there. But there was a manila envelope taped to the underside of the drawer. The tape was yellow and brittle, and it came off in pieces when I pulled the envelope free. I sat on the floor of my father's office with the drawer in my lap and the envelope in my hand. The envelope was unlabeled. It had been folded twice to fit under the drawer. When I unfolded it, I could feel by the weight that whatever was inside was paper, and not very much paper. So I knew it wasn't maintenance logs or photographs. It had to be something else. I opened the envelope, my heart pounding. Inside was a single folded sheet of construction paper. The paper was orange, soft along the creases from being folded for a long time. I unfolded it on the floor in front of me. It was a drawing made clearly by Delilah. I knew her crayon the second I saw it. She had drawn 5 figures in a row across the page in her crayon shorthand. The first was a woman in a triangle dress with yellow hair. Over it she had written, "Mommy," in pink. The second was a boy with a cowlick she had given me on the front of every picture she had ever drawn of me. And over it she had written, "Eli," in green. The third was herself, with brown hair and a purple dress she didn't actually have, but liked drawing. And over it she had written, "Delilah," in purple. The fourth was Bean, with his round otter face and his stick limbs. The fifth was a tall, thin, black shape with no features. She did not give the 5th figure a name. She had drawn arrows between the 5th figure and the figure of herself, and on each of the arrows she had written in tiny purple letters, "No." The arrows pointed both ways. Underneath the row of figures, she had written one line in her purple crayon. "Daddy says shh." I sat with the paper. I struggled to breathe. I stared at that paper for so long, but I had to get up off the floor at some point, so I forced myself up. I folded the paper back into the envelope, and I placed it into my jacket. I put the drawer back in the desk and stood up. I had one more place that I needed to go. The washdown station in the production wing had been pulled out, but the hatch was still in the floor. I didn't notice it the first time I walked past, because the washdown equipment had been mounted over it for years. It was a steel plate set flush in the concrete with a recessed handle, the kind of maintenance hatch I'd seen 100 times on job sites in my own work. I knelt down, and I lifted it. A short steel ladder went down 4 feet into a concrete crawlspace. The ceiling of the crawlspace was the underside of the production floor. The space was maybe 4 feet high, lit only by what came down through the hatch, with the cold, dead air that smelled like wet stone. I had a flashlight on my keychain, so I clicked it on, and I went down. I had to stoop. The crawlspace ran the length of the production wing under the floor I'd walked across as a 9-year-old, and the floor down here was poured concrete, gray and unfinished, with hairline cracks running through it where the slab had cured. The flashlight on my keychain was small enough that I had to sweep it across the floor section by section. Most of the slab was the same gray. About 15 feet from the ladder, near the wall on the south side of the building, there was a section of concrete that was a different gray. It was a rectangle, roughly 4 feet long by 2 feet wide. The edges of it were not perfectly straight, and the surface of it was a little rougher than the rest of the slab around it, because fresh concrete cures a little different from the slab it's been patched into, even when the work is done right. I'd patched concrete on job sites 100 times. I knew what a patch looked like. This patch was decades old. The color had set in long ago. I did not need to test it. I sat on the concrete next to it, and I put my hand flat on it. The concrete was cold. I knew I could sit there and spend an hour trying to pry it open, but I was not ready for what I might see inside. When I could finally move again, I climbed back up the ladder and closed the hatch. I walked out through the empty production room and the empty office hallway. As I approached the break room, my stomach began to feel painful again, and I couldn't bear to look into it when I walked past. I locked the side door, putting the cardboard square back where I found it. I then walked out to the gate. I put the keys in the lockbox and spun the dial. I sat in my car on the shoulder of that county road, and I took my phone out of my jacket pocket. I called my dad.
Hey, son.
I'd had a plan on the drive over about what I would say. I'd been thinking about it for weeks now, practicing sentences in my apartment while hoping that everything in my head was wrong. But none of those words were in my mouth now. I sat in the car with the phone to my ear and listened to my father breathing and waiting. I never noticed how patient he could be on the phone.
Eli, are you there?
Yeah, Dad. I'm here.
Are you okay?
I don't know, Dad. He waited again, and I tried my best not to cry. I had the phone to my ear, and I was listening to my father's breathing again. But somewhere between my previous words and the start of his next, something changed in his tone, even in that breathing.
Where are you, Eli?
I hung up my phone, and I dialed 3 numbers. That was a tough story to finish. Children should be protected, allowed to enjoy their youth and innocence. The idea that anyone could harm them is already a horrible thought, but to be harmed by your own parent, that is a sin beyond sin. Good night. I'm Darkness Prevails. You've been listening to Tales from the Break Room. You can now do everything on our new site. Listen to the show, submit your own story, and check out my other narrations, all in the same place. Go to Eerie.fm. That's EERIE.fm. And consider becoming a member for $8 a month or $70 a year. That's the price of one video game a year, and it helps us to keep doing what we're doing now, especially since YouTube has decided to demonetize everyone and their dog. Members also get bonus stories, exclusive members-only shows, audiobooks, and ad-free listening to all EerieCast content. Again, that's Eerie.fm. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, I'll be clocking out for now, but I'll be back again real soon.